In the actless empire, picking a successor isn't about birthright or merit. The monarch just produces as many kids as possible to find the strongest one among them. It's a total bloodbath. The rule is simple. The child who survives by killing all their siblings becomes the next monarch. The previous emperor had plenty of children to throw into this survival game. One of them was Ranielo Actilus. He butchered every single one of his siblings just to secure the title of crown prince. The boy even bound their hair together and dragged their heads through the palace to show his father. Instead of being horrified, the emperor was thrilled by his youngest son's absolute lack of mercy. That joy didn't last long, because a dagger soon found its way into the old man's chest. Ranielo didn't even blink as he took the life of the man who gave him everything. Even as a kid, his eyes were full of nothing but cold, sadistic glee. Fast forward to the present, and the monster is finally getting married. Angelica stands beside him, looking more like a sacrifice than a bride. The whole ceremony feels like a funeral with extra flowers. A sudden cough from the priest snaps her back to reality. She winces, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Ranielo whispers that he'll keep her around, at least until he finds her boring. It's time for the rings, and Angelica is praying she doesn't drop the damn things. She takes a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her hands are shaking so hard, she can barely slide the gold onto his finger. He reaches out to touch her hair, and her first instinct is to pull away. She freezes, wondering if this is where he decides he's already had enough of her. The girl is too terrified to even look him in the eye. For a second, she catches a glimpse of his face and realizes just how terrifyingly handsome he is. Then he gives her this little smirk that says he knows exactly what she's thinking. He leans in, and the air around them feels heavy enough to suffocate her. They're so close she can see the red in his eyes glowing. He seals the deal with a kiss while the crowd cheers for a couple that's doomed from the start. In the original story, Ranielo was supposed to be obsessed with someone else entirely. He saw his own bloody reflection in the pure eyes of the saintess Serafina. She was the only light in his dark, twisted world. His obsession only grew darker and more violent as time went on. But Serafina eventually snapped, turning her fury back on the man who ruined her life. It was a tragic, bloody mess from beginning to end. And Angelica? She's just a minor character who was supposed to be executed early on. Reading the novel, she couldn't believe anyone would call this a romance. It's pure trash. Now, she's actually stuck inside the body of that pointless side character. If she wants to live, she's going to have to navigate the original plot without getting killed. Her first thought was to fake her own death and just vanish. She imagined Ranielo like a cat. Maybe if she was nice enough, he'd just purr and let her be. Yeah, right. He's more likely to bite her head off the moment she lets her guard down. Taming a monster like him is a suicide mission. Her new plan is to be as invisible as possible and hope he forgets she exists. But walking beside him, she realizes that being the Empress makes laying low pretty much impossible. Ranielo's shadow always seems to be loitering over her. She tries to keep a straight face, but the stress is starting to get to her. One look from him and she's a blushing mess, completely at the mercy of the man who could end her life on a whim. He leans in close, his voice a low, dangerous whisper as he calls her his Empress. Angelica flinches back, her hands flying to her mouth in a panic. Ranielo just stares at her with those glowing red eyes, a small, unsettling smile tugging at his lips. She's completely terrified, tears pricking her eyes as she realizes just how trapped she really is. The Emperor looms over her, his presence suffocating as he waits for her reaction. He's studying her like a predator watching its prey, curious to see what she'll do next. Every move he makes sends another jolt of fear through her entire body. He doesn't look like a husband. He looks like a man who's deciding whether or not to end her right then and there. In the massive, cold bedroom, he asks if she's actually planning on ignoring him. Angelica drops to the floor, her mind racing as she tries to find a way to survive the night. She slowly starts to pick herself up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knows she only has 5 seconds to give him an answer that won't get her killed. Before she can even move, he plants his foot firmly on the train of her wedding dress. Ranielo gives her a look that's pure malice, clearly enjoying the fact that she's cornered. She lets out a small, choked gasp, her eyes wide with absolute dread. He leans in even closer, his gaze fixed on her like he's trying to peel back her soul. He stands over her, tall and imposing, waiting for her to break. Angelica collapses onto the bed, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She's just glad he hasn't drawn his sword yet, though the threat is always hanging over her. He looks down at her and asks if she's really going to faint every single time he talks to her. She forces herself to meet his gaze, her green eyes shimmering as she tells him she permits it. He keeps his foot on her dress, making sure she knows exactly who's in control here. She pushes herself up, trying to maintain some shred of dignity despite her trembling. Sweat beads on her forehead as she struggles to keep her composure. Surprisingly, Ranielo actually looks pleased with her answer, his expression softening just a fraction. Angelica is still shaking like a leaf, her mind screaming at her to run as far away as possible. He reaches out and tilts her chin up, telling her that since she's pleased him, he'll grant her a reward. He drops to one knee in front of her, but Angelica can only wonder what kind of twisted gift a guy like him would give. She stares at him, her brain short-circuiting at the sudden shift in his behavior. He takes her hand, and for a split second, it almost looks like a normal wedding night. Then the tension breaks, and she nearly collapses from the sheer weight of the moment. A sudden cough breaks the silence, and the Emperor pulls back, his mood shifting again. Angelica tries to laugh it off, thinking about how he views everyone else as nothing more than toads. He moves to sit on a nearby bench, pointing across the room with a bored flick of his wrist. She looks up at him, completely lost, and trying to figure out what his next move is. A shiver runs down her spine when she realizes he's still watching her every move. He looks over his shoulder, his expression unreadable as the moonlight hits his face. He reaches out and taps her under the chin, a small gesture that feels like a death sentence. He looks tired, or maybe just bored with the whole game they're playing. Angelica is left sitting in the middle of the floor, her massive dress spread out around her like a cage. The room is silent now, the gold and marble feeling more like a prison than a palace. She finally collapses back against the floor, her hair fanning out as she tries to process the fact that she's still alive. After the Emperor leaves her alone, Angelica just collapses on the bed, her energy completely spent. She curls into a ball, the reality of her situation weighing heavily on her chest. Her mind is a whirlwind of fear and calculations, trying to find a way to navigate the coming days. But Ranielo isn't done with her. He leans back in, those crimson eyes gleaming as he starts a terrifying countdown. He has a small, cruel smile on his face, clearly enjoying the way she trembles at his every word. Angelica's eyes widen in sheer panic as she clutches the silk sheets for dear life. The Emperor looks almost relaxed, his bare chest making the situation feel far too intimate and dangerous. She lets out a sharp gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He reaches out and tilts her chin up, forcing her to look him in the eye while she's at her most vulnerable. Every fiber of her being wants to look away, but she knows that defying him now would be a death sentence. Ranielo's expression is unreadable, a mixture of amusement and something far more predatory. He eventually turns away, his massive frame silhouetted against the morning light as he prepares to leave. He doesn't say another word, but the silence he leaves behind is just as suffocating as his presence. The next morning, Angelica is still in a daze, barely registering the maids moving around her. Cézanne watches her with a concerned expression, noticing the fine sheen of sweat on her mistress's forehead. They lead her to a massive marble tub, where they begin the long process of washing away the stress of the night. As the warm water envelops her, Angelica stares off into the distance, her thoughts already turning to survival. She catches her reflection in the glass, seeing a woman who looks like an empress but feels like a prisoner. Outside, the palace gardens are in full bloom, a stark contrast to the cold fear inside the bedroom. She remembers the scenes from the original story, where Ranielo stood like a god of death amidst the snow. She sinks deeper into the bubbles, hiding her face as she tries to shut out the terrifying visions. She knows she has a family back home, siblings, who probably have no idea what she's going through. They're far away, safe in their own little world, while she's trapped here in the belly of the beast. She looks out at the palace walls and wonders if she could ever find a way to flee this gilded cage. But escape isn't an option right now, especially not when the maids are busy preparing her for her official duties. She realizes she can't just run. The entire empire is destined to fall in the spring regardless of what she does. Memories of the novel's plot flash through her mind, showing the violent fate that awaits everyone in this palace. Cézanne adjusts her gown, the heavy fabric and jewels feeling like a suit of armor she's not ready to wear. A cart filled with silver platters is rolled in, the aroma of expensive food filling the room. The breakfast spread is lavish, featuring everything from succulent meats to fresh salads and seafood. As the wine is poured, Angelica can't help but feel guilty about eating in such luxury while her life is on the line. She takes a hesitant sip, the rich liquid doing little to soothe the knot in her stomach. She knows she's being watched, every move analyzed by the staff who serve the emperor. Cézanne insists that they are only doing their duties, but Angelica can see the fear in the girl's eyes too. She looks down at her plate, the weight of her new title as Empress finally starting to sink in. She's led through the grand hallways, her long train rustling against the polished stone floors. There's work to be done, budgets to review, and palace departments to oversee as part of her new role. She stands before her attendants, looking every bit the regal sovereign in her blue jeweled gown. But as soon as she's alone, she flops onto the nearest sofa, her composure finally breaking. Cézanne looks like she's about to have a panic attack herself, clutching a cloth to her mouth. Despite her exhaustion, Angelica has one more important task to attend to at the palace gates. She settles into a chair for tea, looking weary as she prepares to face the formidable Lady Jacques. Countess Myron Lark, with her graying hair pulled into a tight, severe bun, watches the new empress with a calculating gaze. Angelica meets her stare head-on, her innocent appearance belying the sharp mind that is already working against her enemies. She's refusing to answer. Angelica notes internally, seeing the bead of sweat on the countess's brow as the woman struggles to stay composed. Instead of pressing her, Angelica simply smiles and focuses on her tea, her cheerful expression into a delicate predator lurking just beneath the surface. Like a normal afternoon. But in the Jacques household, things are anything but calm. Lady Jacques is fuming, slamming her hand down while her son Henry stands there. Henry stays perfectly still, listening to his mother's anger without breaking his composed expression. She's on a roll, ranting about how things have turned out since the new empress arrived. From the doorway, someone's watching the tense exchange. It's Sylvia, peeking in to see what the fuss is about. She looks pretty worried, clearly uncomfortable with the heavy atmosphere in the room. Sylvia looks away, unable to watch her family plot like this. Her mind drifts to the crowd at court and the pressure on her to be the future empress. She rushes over to her mother, grabbing her hand as if she could stop whatever they're planning. She drops to her knees right in the middle of the room, looking totally desperate. Sylvia begs them to reconsider, her eyes pleading with her mother to find another way. But Lady Jacques isn't having it. She stands her ground, shouting about their family's ambition. The realization that they won't stop hits Sylvia hard. She looks like her world is crumbling. She can't take the tension anymore and just bolts out of the room. Henry watches her run off, his face unreadable as he turns back to his mother. The conversation turns to Emperor Ranielo, a man known for his terrifying rise to the throne. Lady Jacques lets out a small, satisfied smile as she thinks about the emperor's ruthless nature. She's actually laughing now, confident that their plan is foolproof. Henry closes his eyes, seemingly amused by the high-stakes game they're playing. He knows that for Ranielo, interest is the only thing that matters. Everything else is secondary. With everything set, he walks away to get his own part of the scheme moving. Over at the Imperial Court, the budget approval process is just getting started. They're going through every document, looking for a reason to crush the Empress financially. Meanwhile, Angelica Actilis is just trying to have a quiet tea time. Henry looks satisfied, already seeing the Empress's fall as a done deal. The palace looks peaceful enough from the outside, but inside it's a den of vipers. Since her maid Cézanne returned, Angelica's been able to breathe a little easier. She looks calm, but you can tell she's always waiting for the next attack. And there it is. Lady Jacques shows up with a line of maids, clearly ready for a confrontation. Angelica doesn't even look at them, choosing to ignore their hostile presence. Lady Jacques walks past with a smug expression, certain she's already won. In the throne room, Emperor Ranielo is looking incredibly bored. This isn't a good sign for anyone. Everyone's kneeling before the throne as the trial begins. The tension is through the roof. Angelica keeps her head down, knowing that her survival depends on what happens next. Lady Jacques and Henry bow deep, putting on a show of loyalty while they prepare to strike. Ranielo glances at Angelica and brings up the budget issues, his tone terrifyingly neutral. He smiles, his red eyes gleaming as he waits to see how his boring wife will handle this trap. Henry speaks up, making sure to highlight every perceived mistake Angelica has made. Angelica realized she's in a corner. One wrong word and she's as good as dead. The maids in the room watch in silence, some already anticipating the Empress's execution. Cézanne stands by her mistress, looking on with concern as the trial heats up. Ranielo stares down at her, waiting for the one response that might actually be interesting enough to save her life. Henry Jacques is putting on a real performance, gesturing wildly as he tries to convince the Emperor that Angelica is guilty. From his throne, Ranielo watches the whole show with a cold, detached gaze, not saying a word. Angelica is sweating, realizing that her life depends on what this monster decides to do next. Henry keeps talking, piling on more accusations while Angelica looks down, trying to process her next move. It's a tense scene in the throne room with everyone kneeling, waiting for the Emperor's judgment. Suddenly, Angelica's expression shifts to pure shock. Something Ranielo said has completely caught her off guard. She gasps, looking up at the man who holds her fate in his hands. Ranielo leans forward with a creepy smirk, his red eyes fixed on her. He looks like a predator who just found a new toy. Angelica clutches her chest, her heart racing as she tries to figure out if she just made things worse or better. Ranielo goes back to looking thoughtful, tapping his chin as he considers her human hunt proposal. This empire was built on war and the worship of Attila, the god of conflict, so a proposal like hers fits right in. Everyone here is raised to be ready for battle at a moment's notice, and that includes the Empress. For a second, Angelica imagines a different life, one where she's happy and free from all this palace drama. But the reality of her situation hits her again, and she looks worried. One mistake, and she's history. The old rules are being thrown out. Everything she knew about this world is changing right now. She touches her neck, her hands shaking as she waits for his final word. Ranielo is clearly amused. He likes that she's bold enough to suggest her own death as entertainment. Angelica points at herself, looking genuinely surprised that he's actually going along with her crazy idea. The power dynamic has totally flipped. Angelica is standing now while the Jacques family stays on their knees. She looks down, feeling the weight of the gamble she just made. Henry starts shouting, completely losing his cool when he realizes the Emperor is taking her side. He looks like he's about to blow a fuse, sweating through his expensive clothes as his plan falls apart. Angelica doesn't back down. She challenges him, asking if this matter is really as important as he's making it out to be. She's asserting her authority now, basically telling him to shut up. She even lets out a little chuckle. She's finally got them right where she wants them. Ranielo actually starts clapping. He's impressed by her audacity and the absolute chaos she's caused. Henry is screaming now, realizing he's the one in trouble, not the Empress. The realization hits him like a ton of bricks. He's played his cards and lost. Angelica flinches as the vibe in the room shifts from tense to violent. Without warning, the knights move in and grab Henry, dragging him away. Lady Jacques is forced to the ground too. Their family's power trip is officially over. Angelica turns back to the throne, looking at the man who just casually destroyed her enemies. The room goes silent as the doors close. It's just her and the monster now. She realizes that in this palace, everyone is just a puppet, and Ranielo is the one pulling the strings. He knew they were lying the whole time, but he let it play out just for the fun of it. Angelica flinches when she notices he's looking at her with a new kind of intensity. He gets up from his throne and grabs her chin, forcing her to look him in the eye. Her face flushes as she realizes how close he is. This isn't exactly the safety she was hoping for. He leans in, whispering something right against her neck that sends shivers down her spine. He brushes his thumb against her lip, and for a second, it feels like she's about to be eaten alive. Before she can react, he scoops her up in a bridal carry, lifting her easily. Angelica is a total mess, her face bright red and her hands clenched. Surviving the trial was only the start of her problems. Ranielo leans in close, his presence overwhelming as he continues to toy with Angelica after the trial. He wears a predatory smirk, those piercing red eyes never leaving hers for a second. Angelica sits frozen on the throne, her heart hammering against her ribs as she tries to maintain her composure. Her face is flushed with a mix of fear and embarrassment, realizing just how dangerous this man truly is. He reaches out, his fingers grazing her face in a gesture that feels more like a threat than a caress. Angelica's eyes widen as she searches for any sign of mercy in his gaze, but finds only cold amusement. Life in the Actilus Palace carries on, a sprawling fortress that hides many dark secrets within its walls. In the wake of the trial, Cézanne steps up, volunteering for a role that will keep her close to the Empress. Away from the Emperor's intense gaze, Angelica can finally breathe a little easier, even managing a small laugh. Cézanne remains a constant, loyal presence at her side, always ready to assist with a respectful bow. But the burden of her new life is never far from her mind, and she often finds herself lost in thought. The grand halls of the palace feel a bit less lonely with Cézanne's quiet support. Angelica can't help but stress about her impulsive decision to shout at Marquess Jacques during the trial. Rumors about her reputation are spreading like wildfire, mostly because she hasn't been out in society at all. The maids can't stop whispering, their voices hushed as they trade the latest gossip about their mysterious empress. Despite the rumors, Angelica is determined to make her own way, looking every bit the noblewoman in her fine attire. She spends her days buried in paperwork and correspondence, with Cézanne keeping her tea topped off. The sheer amount of work is exhausting, and she often feels the throb of a headache coming on. Sometimes she feels like a stranger in her own skin, a modern soul trapped in a world of rigid etiquette. When she moves through the palace, she does so with a grace that belies the chaos in her mind. Suddenly, something catches her eye, causing her to pause as she walks through the ornate corridors. Standing outside is a young woman with long, silver hair, a stark contrast to the usual palace staff. Cézanne approaches her, looking a bit concerned as she brings the visitor's presence to Angelica's attention. Angelica is taken aback. She wasn't expecting any visitors, especially not someone like this. The silver-haired girl looks up, her expression a mix of hope and profound desperation. Cézanne explains that the girl has been waiting outside for 5 whole days, ever since the Jacques sentence was proclaimed. Angelica's expression hardens. She knows exactly who this girl is and why she's here. The young woman sinks into a deep, graceful curtsy, showing a level of training that only high nobility possess. "I am Sylvia Jacques," she announces, her voice trembling slightly as she addresses the Empress. She falls to her knees, looking up at Angelica with eyes that are brimming with unshed tears. Up close, Sylvia's desperation is palpable. She's a fallen noble with nowhere else to turn. Angelica watches her closely, her mind racing as she weighs the risks of what's about to be asked. Sylvia begins to plead her case, her words coming out in a rush of emotion and terror. She acknowledges her mother's foolishness, trying to distance herself from the family's crimes. Angelica listens in silence, her heart heavy with the complicated reality of this world. Sylvia bows her head to the floor, a gesture of total submission and a plea for a chance to serve. Angelica's inner monologue is screaming. The daughter of her enemies wants to be her maid? This is insane! Sylvia is actually crying now, her shoulders shaking as she begs for a way to save her family from ruin. Angelica feels a wave of unease. Taking in Sylvia could be a masterstroke or a fatal mistake. Sylvia's voice cracks as she continues her desperate appeal, her face wet with tears of shame and hope. For a second, Angelica recalls the image of Sylvia's mother, the cold, arrogant woman who tried to destroy her. But, Your Majesty, above all. Sylvia's plea hangs in the air as Angelica stares at the broken girl before her. Sylvia's composure fully breaks, her eyes welling with tears as she desperately seeks even a sliver of mercy. Angelica watches her coolly, her green eyes unreadable as she finally addresses the girl. That's right, Sylvia. Looking away, Angelica gazes out the window, the weight of her decisions and this new world heavy upon her. Later that night, sleep refuses to come, leaving Angelica to stare blankly at the canopy of her bed. She sits up, the moonlight filtering into the room and casting long, pale shadows across the floor. A sudden sound nearby makes her heart leap, and she turns her head sharply toward the disturbance. Her breath hitches as she finds herself staring into the darkness, her senses on high alert. Before she can even cry out, Ranielo is there, his face mere inches from hers, with a terrifyingly calm expression. He looms over her bed, looking down at his fragile empress with an unsettlingly thoughtful gaze. His hand reaches out slowly, his fingers grazing the bedsheets as he closes the distance between them. Ranielo pins her with his intense ruby-red gaze, a predatory smile playing on his lips as he invades her private sanctuary. Ranielo smiles down at Angelica, his expression completely unreadable. Angelica looks absolutely terrified while her new husband holds her close. His red eyes practically glow in the dark as he enjoys her panicked reaction. He grabs her chin, forcing her to look him right in the eye. Angelica freezes up as his face gets dangerously close to hers. He just chuckles, clearly amused by how much she's shaking. At this moment, Angelica realizes she's married to a total jerk. They stand alone on the grand balcony under the moonlight, the tension thick enough to cut. Ranielo turns to leave, tossing out a final, cold comment over his shoulder. All Angelica can do is nod while her hands tremble uncontrollably. He leans back in to whisper something directly into her ear that makes her skin crawl. She stares ahead with wide, vacant eyes, trying her best to keep her composure. Ranielo flashes a handsome but chilling smile that doesn't reach his eyes. He pinches her chin one last time, looking satisfied with the fear he's caused. He waves goodbye and walks away, leaving a stunned Angelica behind in the dark. Later that evening, Ranielo casually pours himself a drink like nothing happened. Angelica watches him from across the room, sweating through her dress. He smirks at her, fully aware of exactly how much power he holds over her life. To him, other people are nothing more than cattle meant for his entertainment. He didn't have some tragic past that turned him into a monster. The guy was simply born evil, finding joy in the suffering of others. He casually pours red wine right over Angelica's head without a second thought. Drenched and humiliated, she realizes she's dealing with a beautiful but terrifying predator. He doesn't even bother to apologize, just grabs her hand and drags her along. Angelica lies in bed, swearing to herself she'll do whatever it takes to survive. Ranielo is right there beside her, casually taking up most of the space in the bed. He watches her with those sharp red eyes, never letting her relax for a single second. She flinches the very moment he starts to shift beside her. He mumbles something under his breath while leaning casually on his hand. Angelica forces a tired smile, hiding her nerves as best as she can. Her plan is to play the part until winter, then make a run for it. She just needs to wait until he heads out on his next expedition. That's when he'll meet the real heroine, Serafina, and finally leave her alone. Ranielo sits up and mentions a second rule he added to their little game. Angelica looks up, her heart dropping as she hears this new detail. She pulls the blankets tight, realizing she missed something critical to her survival. She shivers, the full weight of her desperate situation finally sinking in. Ranielo watches her reaction with a look of pure, twisted mischief. Meanwhile, her enemies are already training for the upcoming hunt. Countess Myran Lark swings her sword with terrifying, murderous precision. Her son, Henry Jacques, isn't far behind, wielding a massive axe. Angelica peers through the bars, knowing her life is officially on the line. Angelica looks out from the balcony, her mind heavy with thoughts of survival in this brutal empire. In Actilis, martial prowess is a requirement for every citizen, ensuring they're always ready for war. This culture of violence spares no one, with even women and children expected to master the blade and bow. Angelica realizes Ranielo has likely already spread word of the deadly new stakes he's added to the hunt. She turns to Cézanne, her loyal maid, to discuss the mounting pressure and her plan to stay alive. A sudden jolt of alarm catches her off guard, her eyes widening in a moment of pure shock. Reaching out, she clutches Cézanne's hands, seeking a small moment of human connection and comfort. Her strength finally gives out, and the heavy bow slips from her fingers, hitting the floor with a thud. Her legs buckle, and she collapses onto the balcony, her body reaching its absolute limit from exhaustion. Even in her small, chibi state, the weight of her failures seems to pin her to the ground after her bow drops. Determination, flickering back to life, she struggles to her feet to continue her grueling archery practice. She grits her teeth and pulls the bowstring back, her muscles screaming under the repetitive strain of the day. The target stands mocking her in the distance, a reminder of just how much further she has to go. Sweat beads on her forehead as she tries to keep the bow steady, her focus wavering from sheer fatigue. An arrow flies through the air, carrying all her hopes of surviving the upcoming hunt with it. Over in the throne room, Sylvia Jacques, the silver-haired daughter of her rival, kneels before the Emperor. Sylvia keeps her head bowed low, showing the submissive posture expected in the presence of the tyrant. She looks up with a radiant, desperate smile, trying to appeal to Ranielo's mercy for her family's sake. Ranielo isn't moved in the slightest, and snaps his fingers to signal the end of her useless audience. Sylvia looks back in terror as she's escorted away, her pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. A quiet moment passes in the palace, the ornate decorations masking the cold cruelty that rules these halls. Angelica's eyes snap open as she wakes up in her chambers, the silence of the room feeling oppressive. She sits up in bed, her hair a mess, and her expression one of utter exhaustion and lingering fear. Her blood runs cold when she notices Ranielo sitting right there, watching her like a hawk from the edge of the bed. Startled, she frantically pulls the white silk sheets up to hide her vulnerability from his sharp gaze. She forces a shaky smile and gulps, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Ranielo gives her a predatory smirk, clearly relishing the sheer terror he inspires in her. He reaches out and tilts her chin up, forcing her to meet his intense and unsettling crimson stare. Despite her inner panic, she keeps her face neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. He rests a heavy hand on her shoulder, a gesture of affection that feels more like a direct threat. A deep frown settles on her face as she tries to figure out what the Emperor's true intentions are. She pushes herself through another round of training, her back to the world as she focuses on the bow. The court's high-ranking nobles look on with disdain, seeing her fragility as a sign of weakness. The crushing weight of her new life finally breaks her, and she lets out a quiet, desperate sob. Ranielo watches her closely, his red eye tracking her every movement as if studying a fascinating new specimen. Wiping her face with her sleeve, she tries to pull herself together before he loses interest entirely. A dark chuckle escapes him, his amusement growing as he watches her struggle to regain her dignity. He leans over her small frame, his presence filling the room and making it hard for her to breathe. He looms over her like a dark shadow, his handsome face twisted into a grin that promises only danger. Later, her vision blurs from a high fever as a cold, damp cloth is laid across her burning forehead. To the shock of the entire palace, Ranielo himself stays by her side, personally tending to her through the night. Having finished his strange display of nursing, he eventually turns and walks away from the bedside. Sisan continues to tend to the feverish empress, placing a fresh, damp cloth on her forehead. The maid's expression is one of pure worry as she watches her mistress struggle to recover. Ranielo remains in the room, watching the scene from a plush chair with a detached, cold interest. He lets out a small, predatory smirk, clearly amused by the sight of his wife's fragility. Angelica catches his eye and feels a wave of renewed terror, her fevered mind racing for a way to survive. The sheer weight of her situation becomes too much, and in her chibi form, she simply faints with a desperate cry. A tray with a bowl of warm soup is brought into the room, the steam rising in the soft light. To everyone's surprise, the Emperor personally feeds her, forcing a spoon into her mouth as she reluctantly swallows. He leans down, his voice a low, terrifying whisper that vibrates through her entire being. Even in his small, chibi state, Ranielo's "ha" is full of a dark arrogance as he finishes feeding her. In a sudden mental flash, she imagines Henry Jacques chasing her down with a massive axe during the hunt. The soup is gone, leaving behind an empty bowl that symbolizes the start of her new, brutal reality. A dark shadow falls over her face as she contemplates the lethal game she's been forced to play. She envisions herself in the dense forest, a bow in hand, fighting for every breath against her pursuers. The vision continues as she flees through the snow-covered trees, the cold air stinging her lungs. Snapping back to the present, she sits up in bed, her green eyes burning with a new, desperate resolve. Ranielo watches her, his gaze sharp and expectant, as if waiting for her to prove she's worth his time. He leans closer, his words carrying the weight of a death sentence or a promise of power. She forces a bright, empty laugh, trying to play the part of the obedient, harmless empress. But her mask slips for a fraction of a second, her expression faltering as the true horror of her situation sinks in. A sudden chilling aura, a literal whoosh, surrounds him, his presence growing dark and suffocating once more. With a violent jolt, Angelica wakes up, her heart pounding against her ribs in the early morning light. She realizes with a start that Ranielo had stayed by her side through the darkest hours of the night. He had only departed as the sun began to rise, leaving her alone with her thoughts and her fear. She sits up and tries to shake off the lingering dread, forcing a cheerful expression for the sake of appearances. But as soon as she's alone, her face pales, the memory of his cold eyes haunting her every move. She quickly changes into practical training clothes, tying her hair back with a determined "where's my bow?" She scans the training courtyard, her anxiety rising as she searches for the equipment she needs to survive. "Ha!" Ranielo's voice cuts through the air, and she turns to find him already there, looking casual and dangerous. He holds out a bow, the weapon a dark reminder of the deadly stakes of the upcoming imperial hunt. He tilts his head, studying her like a predator, watching its prey try to learn how to fight back. Flustered by his intense scrutiny, she can only stare back, her cheeks flushing with a mix of anger and fear. Her hand, clad in a black leather glove, reaches out to grasp the cold, hard frame of the bow. For a brief moment, she smiles, the weight of the weapon giving her a tiny, fragile sense of control. Ranielo reaches out, his fingers grazing her hair in a gesture that feels more like a claim than a comfort. She flinches involuntarily, her eyes wide with a surprise she can't quite hide from him. He turns away with a casual shrug, his attention shifting as easily as the wind. He stands behind her, his large hands guiding her own as she attempts to pull back the bowstring. The lesson quickly turns more intense as he has her wield a heavy sword, his body looming right over hers. A glint of cold steel reflects in her eyes, a sharp reminder that every lesson here is a lesson in survival. Even in their chibi forms, the training is brutal, with Angelica struggling to hit even the closest target. With a sudden toss, Ranielo throws a training blade toward her, forcing her to react or be hit. Ranielo leans forward with a cold, predatory grin, relishing the fear he's instilled in his wife. He lunges forward, the wooden training sword whistling through the air as Angelica lets out a sharp cry of terror. His red eyes gleam with a sadistic light, the thrill of the hunt clearly more important to him than her safety. Angelica flinches violently, cowering beneath his shadow as the sheer weight of his presence overwhelms her. The tip of the wooden blade stops inches from her throat, leaving her trembling and breathless on the training ground. Ranielo pulls back, his expression shifting to one of mild boredom, as if her lack of skill is a personal affront to him. "No, it's because you're too fast," Angelica exclaims, still shaken. "I'm already dead before I have a chance to look." They stand together in the sprawling courtyard, the sun high above the imposing towers of the Actilus Palace. She grips the hilt of her practice weapon, her gloved hands shaking as she tries to regain her composure. Ranielo looms over her from behind, his closeness sending a flush of both heat and dread through her body. She looks up at him, caught between the desire to flee and the absolute necessity of staying in his good graces. His eyes remain fixed on her, cold and calculating, as if he's still deciding whether she's worthy of being his empress. In a rare, confusing gesture, he ruffles her hair before walking away, leaving Angelica stunned and questioning his motives. High above the vast Actilus Empire, the sun shines on the capital, though dark rumors are already beginning to spread. Countess Myran Lark, the severe-faced Lady Jacques with her hair in a tight bun, hides a sharp smile behind her fan while whispering with other ladies. Later, Angelica makes her way through the palace, her pink and white gown trailing behind as her loyal maid Cézanne follows close by. She feels the sharp glares of the court ladies, their whispers trailing after her like a poisonous fog. Despite the weight of the upcoming hunt, she holds her head high, determined to survive the deadly games of the Actilus court. After surviving the human hunt, Angelica Actilus finds her room packed with gift boxes from people trying to get on her good side. She can't wrap her head around why there are so many of them piled high. She picks up an envelope, wondering who exactly is sending her these congratulations. The training to survive this place was brutal, starting with a strict diet that felt more like starvation. She was forced to eat nothing but protein-heavy salads to build the muscle she desperately needed. Then came the sparring. Angelica lunged at Ranielo Actilus with a wooden sword, but he barely had to move to block her. It was grueling work that left her collapsed on the floor, gasping for air every single day. She tried to laugh through the pain, even when her body felt like it was falling apart. But Ranielo just watched her from above, his expression as cold and detached as a predator's. She spent her rare free moments looking out over the empire, realizing just how vast her prison really is. The view was beautiful, but it was hard to enjoy while constantly fearing for her life. She leaned against the stone, trying to steady her nerves before the next round of psychological warfare. She peeks over the edge, the weight of her situation starting to feel permanent. Ranielo is suddenly right there, his presence catching her off guard like it always does. He leans in close, and for a moment, the entire world seems to narrow down to just the two of them. He looks her in the eye with a terrifying intensity, as if he's actually seeing her for the first time. Later, it's time for the celebratory banquet, and her maids have to work overtime to get her ready. Ranielo shows up in his formal black uniform, looking every bit the ruthless emperor. Angelica gulps, the pressure in the room spiking the second he steps toward her. She forces a polite smile, desperately trying to hide how much he unnerves her. He just laughs, clearly finding her struggle to stay calm hilarious. She tries to stand her ground, telling him she's not just some soft, defenseless little animal. He doesn't respond with words, he just reaches out and pulls her close. He holds her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze head-on. He studies her like a prize he's just won, his red eyes dark and unreadable. Angelica freezes, her hands clenched as she tries not to tremble under his touch. He leans over her shoulder, his closeness feeling more like a threat than anything else. She tugs at her dress, feeling completely exposed by the way he's staring. She realizes he's not just looking at her, he's actually recognizing her face among the crowd of identical pests he usually sees. The realization is terrifying, especially with those red eyes pinned on her so intensely. She looks at her reflection, seeing a stranger staring back in all that fancy jewelry. Ranielo steps up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders in a possessive grip. She adjusts her shimmering blue gown, trying to look the part of a powerful empress. They look like the perfect imperial couple in the mirror, but the tension in the room is thick enough to cut. He tilts her chin up, making sure she's looking right at him before they head out. Outside, the castle is fully decorated for the summer solstice celebration. Angelica turns toward her maids, who bow deeply as she prepares to make her appearance. She puts on a bright, happy face for the public, even though she's internally exhausted. But as they walk, he suddenly grabs her wrist, stopping her in her tracks. He pulls her back into his space, his smile sharp and knowing. They step out onto the balcony together, greeted by the cheers of the massive crowd below. He chuckles softly, leaning into her ear while the rest of the world watches their perfect royal romance. Angelica Actilus stands on the royal balcony, dazzled by the sheer scale of the crowd gathered for the festival. Ranielo Actilus is right beside her, his sharp grin making her feel more like a trophy than a wife. Below them, the Imperial Brass Band blasts their trumpets, officially kicking off the summer solstice festivities. An announcer shouts at the top of his lungs that the human hunt has officially begun, and the crowd goes wild. From a distance, the castle looks like a paradise, draped in flowers and banners for the upcoming blood sport. Ranielo grabs her hand, his possessive grip a constant reminder of who's actually running this show. Angelica feels a sudden, intense wave of heat wash over her, the bright sun, and the noise making her head spin. The clear blue sky above is a stark contrast to the dark games about to play out on the ground. She looks down at the banquet tables, where the nobility is already gossiping about her chances of survival. Ranielo raises his glass, watching her with a look of pure, predatory amusement. Angelica stares into her wine, her own reflection shaking as she tries to keep it together. She takes a long, desperate gulp, hoping the wine will steady her nerves before the entertainment begins. Her vision starts to blur, and a bead of sweat rolls down her face as the drug begins to take hold. She gasps, a sudden sharp tightness in her chest, making it nearly impossible to catch her breath. She feels dizzy and disoriented, while Ranielo just leans in, clearly enjoying her suffering. He doesn't offer to help, he just pulls her back up so the crowd doesn't see her weakness. She forces a strained laugh, trying to play off her collapse as nothing more than a bit of tipsiness. But the guests are already whispering, their judgmental eyes fixed on the fragile new empress. Ranielo's grin never wavers after all. He's the one who gave her the drug in the first place. He places his hands on her shoulders, a gesture of support that feels more like he's pinning her down. Angelica tries to regain her composure as the poison starts to sharpen her senses in a way that's almost painful. She remembers the gift he presented her earlier, a concentrated venom from the Solio frog. He told her it would boost her physical limits, but she knew it was a dangerous, lethal gamble. The sound of the trumpets rings out again, signaling that the first group of hunters has entered the arena. The bloodthirsty crowd erupts into cheers, eager for the main event to finally start. Under the influence of the drug, Angelica's fear starts to melt away, replaced by a cold, sharp aggression. She looks over her shoulder and spots Sylvia Jacques standing alone in the shadows, looking pale and nervous. Sylvia mumbles to herself, her eyes wide with terror as she realizes she's the one being hunted now. Angelica recalls how Sylvia had knelt before her weeks ago, begging for mercy after her family's betrayal failed. Now, Angelica is the one armed with a bow and arrows, ready to play the game on her own terms. Sylvia is handed a dagger, but her hands are shaking so much she can barely keep a grip on it. Ranielo stands before the stadium, soaking in the adulation of his subjects like it's his birthright. He leads Angelica toward the forest, the entertainment of the day, finally ready to begin. Angelica feels the drug taking full control, her eyes glowing with a dark, predatory light. She senses everything around her with terrifying clarity, from the wind to the racing heartbeats of her prey. High above, a hawk screeches, marking the moment the human hunt truly begins. She draws her bow with an unnatural strength, her entire focus narrowing down to a single point. From behind the safety of the tower wall, Sylvia watches her with a growing sense of dread. She gasps as she realizes that the fragile woman she once knew has been replaced by something lethal. Angelica moves with a speed that shouldn't be humanly possible, scaling the stone walls like a phantom. Sylvia screams as a shadow looms over her, a hand reaching out from the darkness to claim her. Angelica looks down from the heights, the drug-induced clarity showing her exactly how to win this game. Countess Myron Lark yanks her daughter, Sylvia Jacques, by her silver hair, her face contorted with a cruel, unyielding rage. She screams at her, her voice full of venom as she blames Sylvia for their family's spectacular downfall. Between them, a glowing, pulsing heart symbolizes the high stakes of life and death in this imperial hunt. The Countess looms over her with a sinister smirk, relishing the power she still holds over her own kin. From high atop the stone tower, Angelica Actilus watches the scene, her bow at the ready and a cold smile on her lips. Below, Sylvia is pushed to the dirt, the glint of a blade nearby signaling the end of her mother's patience. Angelica draws her bowstring tight, her eyes fixed on the woman who thinks she's the one in control. An arrow whistles through the air, cutting a sharp path through the silence of the forest clearing. The projectile swooshes past Sylvia's head, making her gasp in terror as it narrowly misses her and strikes a nearby tree. Both Sylvia and the Countess look up toward the battlements, realizing the Empress has entered the fray. Countess Myran slams Sylvia back against the ground, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. She tries to reposition herself, the panic in her movements clear, as she realizes she's now the target. Sylvia clutches her head, the trauma of the night, and her mother's abuse, pushing her to a point of no return. Her hand fumbles blindly on the ground until it closes around a jagged, heavy stone. In a desperate surge of survival instinct, she lunges at her mother, pinning the Countess down under her weight. "I want to live!" she screams, bringing the rock down on her mother's head with a sickening, heavy thud. Her eyes are wild and bloodshot as she prepares to strike again, fueled by a lifetime of resentment and pure terror. Angelica steps down from the tower stairs, her bow still gripped in her hand as she walks calmly toward the aftermath. The Countess lies face down in the dirt, defeated not by an imperial arrow, but by the daughter she broke. Sylvia kneels in the dirt before the Empress, her spirit completely shattered by the weight of her own actions. Angelica looks down at her with a chilling, manic delight, her eyes glowing with the intense effects of the drug. She reaches into her belt and pulls out a small, ornate dagger that glimmers with a lethal purple light. Countess Myran Lark, barely conscious, looks up in terror as the Empress raises the blade to finish what Sylvia started. A spray of blood hits the nearby trees as a final, agonizing scream echoes through the dark forest. Angelica wipes a smear of blood from her lip, the rush of the kill making her feel more alive and powerful than ever. Sylvia staggers back, her face a mask of horror as she looks at the carnage they've left behind. Angelica stands amidst the blood and dust, her pink hair ruffling in the wind as she basks in her lethal victory. Suddenly, Henry Jacques appears from the trees, wielding a massive, heavy executioner's axe. He trembles, the sight of the blood-soaked Empress enough to shake even the most hardened nobleman. Angelica doesn't hesitate. She instantly knocks another arrow, her aim steady despite the chaos. "Mother." Sylvia whimpers, her voice barely a whisper as she watches her mother's body lying in the dirt. Henry's eye narrows, his gaze fixed on the woman who has turned his family's hunt into their execution. The bowstring snaps, and the arrow flies with a sharp shing toward Henry's exposed chest. He tries to turn, but the heavy axe is no match for the speed of the Empress's shot. The arrow finds its mark, sinking deep into Henry's shoulder and causing him to stumble back from the force. "TSK," Angelica mutters, her brow furrowing in annoyance. "I missed the heart." Her eyes glow an unnatural vibrant green, the Solio frog poison pushing her physical limits to their absolute breaking point. But the surge of power is fleeting. A sudden crushing pain tears through her chest, making her stagger. Her strength fails her all at once, and she falls backward, her bow slipping from her numb, trembling fingers. She collapses onto the grass, the world spinning as the drug's rebound effect takes hold of her body. She gasps for air, her vision tunneling as the agony of the poison becomes unbearable. Above her, Henry Jacques looms once more, his weapon raised high for a final, vengeful blow. Just as Henry Jacques' axe begins its descent, a blade pierces through his chest from behind with a brutal, sudden stab. The lethal strike sends the heavy axe clattering to the forest floor with a metallic clang, the threat extinguished in an instant. Angelica Actilus looks up, her vision blurred and her mind reeling with shock as her savior and her greatest fear appears before her. Ranielo Actilus stares down at her, his red eyes gleaming with a predatory amusement that is more terrifying than the man he just killed. He leans over her prone form, his presence suffocating and absolute as he claims his prize in the middle of the carnage. Angelica trembles, tears of pain and fear streaming down her face as the Emperor's chilling smile looms inches from her own. From his belt, Ranielo pulls a small, ornate golden vial, the sunlight glinting off its intricate filigree patterns. With a sharp pop, he uncorks the bottle, his expression one of twisted satisfaction as he prepares to administer the remedy. Angelica's eyes flutter, her body nearly spent as the final agonizing waves of the poison wash over her. Ranielo takes a long, deliberate sip of the liquid, his gaze never leaving the face of the woman on the grass. He captures her lips in a forceful kiss, the cool, bitter medicine passing from his mouth into hers to counteract the lethal toxin. Angelica can only let out a muffled gasp as the antidote begins to course through her veins, her body still weak and unresponsive. Sometime later, she manages to sit up, glancing around at the blood-soaked clearing in a daze of lingering exhaustion and trauma. Ranielo stands tall amidst the bodies of their enemies, his arms spread wide as he basks in the total destruction he has wrought. Angelica looks down at the aftermath of the hunt, the reality of the night's horrors finally beginning to settle in her mind. A violent shiver racks her frame as she stares at the Emperor, realizing that her survival has only tied her more tightly to his madness. Ranielo and Angelica stand on the balcony, looking out over the Empire together. He leads her forward, his hand steady as they step out to address the crowd. Down below, everyone drops to their knees, their cheers echoing across the plaza. Back inside, Angelica can't help but flinch every time he gets a little too close. The orchestra keeps the music going, making the whole scene look way more peaceful than it actually is. She tries to focus on the performance, but having him right behind her is a lot to handle. Ranielo leans in, locking her in place with a look that says he's not done with her yet. Up close, his eyes are intense, like he's trying to read every thought she's having. He pulls her closer, completely ignoring his own rule about not recognizing faces. They move into the center of the room, drawing every eye as they start to dance. He dips her low, catching her before she can trip, and she looks completely caught off guard. She stares up at him, her heart racing while she tries to figure out his next move. For a second, the stress of the hunt and his sudden obsession starts to feel like too much. He just watches her, clearly noticing that she's starting to crack under the pressure. A sharp smile crosses his face, like he's finally found a toy that's actually fun to play with. He turns his attention back to the nobles, looking cold and bored with everyone else. Then he leans in to whisper something that leaves her totally shocked. Angelica tries to keep her empress face on, even though she's clearly exhausted by all the drama. The room goes quiet when a woman walks up to the throne and drops into a low bow. It's Sylvia Jacques, and the gossip starts instantly. Nobody can believe she showed up. One of the nobles points her out, mocking her for coming back after her family's total downfall. Angelica is genuinely stunned to see her old rival acting so desperate and submissive. Sylvia doesn't even look up, just staying bowed as she waits for some kind of answer. The crowd starts laughing, clearly enjoying the sight of a fallen noble begging for a second chance. Ranielo just smirks, obviously entertained by how ruthless everyone is being. Sylvia stays on the ground, basically crawling toward the steps of the throne to prove her loyalty. From their seats, the imperial couple watches as the whole social order gets flipped on its head. Angelica is sweating a little, realizing just how much her survival has changed the game. The other nobles keep right on whispering, more interested in the scandal than anything else. As the sun starts to set, the palace is covered in a warm, golden light. Needing a breather from the noise, Angelica slips away to sit by the fountain. She sits there alone, trying to wrap her head around how she became the center of Ranielo's world. A shadow falls over her, and she looks up to see the Emperor has followed her out. He walks over with that total confidence he always has, like he owns the whole garden. He's picked a flower, looking way too casual for a guy who is just watching someone beg for their life. He holds the bloom up to her face, his eyes fixed on her with a weirdly intense look. She immediately stands up and bows, her survival instincts kicking into high gear. He watches her for a long moment, and she manages to give him a small, nervous smile. They stand there in silence, a couple that definitely shouldn't work, yet here they are. He reaches out his hand, making a gesture that feels a lot more like a command than a choice. Their fingers touch, and for a second, everything else just falls away. Ranielo gives her a handsome smile, looking every bit the perfect prince, even if they both know better. The banquet is in full swing, but the noise of the crowd feels miles away. Angelica follows Ranielo, her heart heavy with the weight of everything that's happened. He leads her toward his private quarters, far from the prying eyes of the court. Once they're alone, Ranielo turns around, catching her completely off guard. Angelica's face flushes as she realizes just how intimate this situation has become. Before she can even step back, he reaches out and grabs her arm with a firm grip. He pins her against him, leaving her with absolutely nowhere to run. She lets out a soft sound as he pulls her close, the tension between them reaching a breaking point. Ranielo leans in, his eyes glowing with that predatory look she knows all too well. Angelica stares at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. He steps into the steaming bath, looking perfectly at home in the opulent room. She watches him, her face burning as she tries to figure out what he wants. He tells her the water will cool down soon and invites her to dip her toes in first. She hesitates, her gaze fixed on the water as she tries to steady her breathing. Suddenly, he reaches out and catches her foot, his touch warm and startling. With a sudden splash, he pulls her closer to the edge of the large tub. Her hand trembles as she tries to find her balance against his bare chest. They're face to face now, and the look he gives her is both intense and unreadable. He pulls her into his arms, his hold firm as they sit in the quiet room. The world outside disappears as they stay there, trapped in this strange, forced intimacy. Eventually, she lets out a long sigh, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up. Ranielo just smirks, seemingly satisfied with the way she's finally stopped fighting. He reaches out his hand, his fingers barely brushing against hers on the bed. Angelica drifts off into a deep, restless sleep, surrounded by the scent of flowers. When the morning light begins to filter in, Ranielo is already awake and drying off. She stays perfectly still, watching him as she tries to process the fact that she's still here. A soft sound escapes her as she jolts awake, her mind racing to catch up with reality. Her breath comes in short, sharp hitches as the memories of the night before return. Ranielo leans over her, his presence just as overwhelming as it was in the dark. Their faces are just inches apart, the air between them thick and heavy with tension. He leans in even closer, his gaze fixed on her with a frightening intensity. His red eyes search hers, looking for any sign of the entertainment he craves. For a moment, it feels like time has stopped as they stay locked in that gaze. He lets out a sharp breath, pulling back just enough to break the spell. She notices a small smear of blood on his lip, a stark contrast against his pale skin. Angelica starts to tremble, tears welling up as she realizes how close she is to the edge. She starts to sob, the fear and frustration of her life in this palace finally boiling over. Ranielo just watches her cry before, simply stating that everything is all right. Outside, the birds begin to chirp, signaling that the long night is finally over. She takes a deep, shaky breath, trying to regain some sense of control. Ranielo turns away, his mind already moving on to the next political game. She jolts as he moves, still on edge even though the immediate danger has passed. Angelica sits up abruptly in bed, clutching the sheets to her chest as she realizes where she is. Ranielo sits at the edge of the bed, his back to her, seemingly indifferent to her sudden wakefulness. Later, at the breakfast table, the clatter of silverware and the oppressive silence of the room make Angelica's heart race. She tries to focus on the lavish meal laid out before them, but the weight of Ranielo's presence across the table is impossible to ignore. His stare is making me so uncomfortable, she thinks, catching the predatory glint in his eyes as he watches her every move. She attempts to maintain a composed facade, but the predatory smile on Ranielo's face tells her that he's enjoying her obvious discomfort. Her thoughts drift to the news he just delivered. Sylvia will be moving into his palace today. It's another complication she isn't ready to face. He's intentionally teasing me. Angelica fumes internally, her brow furrowing as she stares down at the food on her plate. A soft chuckle escapes Ranielo, and she notices a small, fresh cut on his lower lip that definitely wasn't there before. His lip is bleeding? She wonders, her eyes wide with surprise. But he wasn't hurt yesterday. Ranielo's gaze remains unwavering, his crimson eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that feels almost physical. Angelica flinches, her body reacting instinctively to the sheer power and unpredictability radiating from the man across from her. Without warning, he leans across the table, his hand reaching out toward her face as if to bridge the distance between them. He gets so close that she can feel his breath against her skin, his smile widening at her obvious distress. "I did that? Why would I do something so insane?" She screams internally, memories of the previous night beginning to haunt her. Ranielo rests his chin on his hand, a smug look of satisfaction crossing his handsome face as he watches her struggle for words. He leans back slightly, but the air in the room remains thick with the tension he's so expertly cultivated. He glances at her untouched plate, his presence making even the finest meal seem impossible to swallow. She recalls the rumors that even after a long day of state affairs, he spends his nights training with relentless focus. The sound of a quill scratching against parchment fills the quiet office as Ranielo turns his attention to the scrolls on his desk. Angelica sits nearby, her eyes downcast as she tries to process her precarious position in this strange new world. Ranielo looks up from his work, his expression stern and focused, the weight of his duties momentarily eclipsing his interest in her. "Bring a chair for the Empress," he commands suddenly, his voice echoing in the large, quiet room. A servant enters and bows low, quickly moving to fulfill the Emperor's order. Angelica is taken aback by the sudden gesture, her eyes widening as she looks at the man who holds her fate in his hands. She sits in the offered chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she waits for his next move. Ranielo gives her a look that is half amused and half predatory, clearly enjoying the total power he has over her. Internally, Angelica is a complete mess, her chibi self sobbing at the desk while the stoic Ranielo continues his work without a second thought. The grand hallways of the palace stand tall, silent witnesses to the political maneuvering happening within these walls. Ranielo tosses aside a quill, his frustration with the endless paperwork evident in the sharp movement of his hand. Exhausted by the stress and the late hour, Angelica eventually falls into a deep sleep right there in the chair. She stays that way for some time, her breathing evening out as she finally finds a moment of peace in the heart of the palace. A hand gently cups her cheek, the touch startlingly tender compared to the cold atmosphere of the room. Ranielo watches her sleep, his red eyes filled with a rare moment of genuine curiosity as he looks at her peaceful face. He leans in closer, his face just inches from hers, as if searching for something hidden in her expression. The slight rattle of her chair as she begins to stir is enough to break the quiet spell of the moment. Angelica jolts awake, her hands flying to her face in a reflexive gesture of shock as she finds Ranielo hovering over her. Her heart hammers against her ribs badum, as she realizes just how vulnerable she was while she slept. Pardon me, Your Majesty," she stammers, her voice trembling as she tries to regain her composure. She looks at him with wide, uncertain eyes, waiting for the mockery or punishment she expects to follow. Ranielo just chuckles, a low, melodic sound that does little to ease the frantic beating of her heart. He stands and walks toward the ornate doors of the study, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. As they leave the room, Angelica trails behind him, still feeling flustered and uncertain about what he expects from her next. Ranielo leans in close to Angelica, a mocking glint in his eyes. "You call that an opinion?" he asks, while a servant in the background recoils in shock at the Emperor's boldness. "He even personally trained me at night," Angelica thinks nervously as Ranielo's predatory smile widens. "Want a duel?" he challenges, prompting a frantic "nope" from her. The grand silhouette of the palace stands against the twilight sky, its illuminated windows a stark contrast to the growing shadows of the surrounding gardens. Back in the relative safety of her own chambers, Angelica collapses onto the edge of the bed with a heavy sigh, the exhaustion of the day finally washing over her. "It's chilly here," Susan says softly, gently wrapping a warm crimson cloak around Angelica's shoulders as the Empress looks on with a weary expression. Angelica's eyes well up with tears as she stares into the distance, her heart heavy with the weight of her uncertain future in this dangerous court. Her maids attend to her in silence, their movements careful and practiced as they help her prepare for the night, while Angelica remains lost in a fog of worry. She catches a glimpse of herself in the vanity mirror, the reflection showing a woman who looks like a fragile doll trapped in a gilded cage. Reaching out to touch the cold glass, she looks at her reflection with a mix of fear and determination, knowing she must find a way to survive. The next morning, a bright sun rises over the lush greenery of the palace grounds, signaling the start of another day of political maneuvering. Angelica spends her morning buried in books, her bed covered in scrolls and heavy volumes as she desperately searches for any advantage she can find. Her research is interrupted when Ranielo saunters into the room, a book of his own in hand, and a characteristically bored expression on his face. He leans over her, peering at the title of her book with a dismissive scoff. "I don't know who gave you this, but you're wasting your time." Without waiting for an invitation, he flops onto the bed beside her, his overwhelming presence immediately making the large room feel cramped. He carelessly tosses his own book onto the pile, the sound of it hitting the other volumes echoing through the quiet chamber. Angelica squeezes her cheek in frustration, her emerald eyes wide as she struggles to maintain her composure under Ranielo's intense gaze. One of Ranielo's crimson eyes remains fixed on her, tracking her every movement with an unsettling, predatory focus. He leans in impossibly close, his smirk widening as he catches her gaze, clearly enjoying the way she trembles under his undivided attention. Ranielo leans in way too close, looming over her like he owns the place. He's got this creepy, satisfied smile on his face that never means anything good. He starts running his fingers through her hair, treating her like some kind of prize. Angelica flinches hard, but he doesn't stop, just keeps that shark-like grin going. You can see the panic in her eyes. She's trying to stay calm while her heart's racing. He keeps talking, probably dropping more of those subtle threats he loves so much. The palace looks beautiful from the outside, but it's basically a high-end prison. Sylvia Jacques looks absolutely floored, like she can't believe what she's hearing. She pulls the headmaid aside to gossip, probably trying to figure out her next move. Angelica's muscles are absolutely screaming from that frog venom drug he gave her. The tension between the maids is thick enough to cut with a knife. Even her inner chibi is curled up in pain from the side effects. She lets out a massive sigh, just trying to survive the day without collapsing. The staff is watching her like hawks, waiting for her to show any sign of weakness. She forces a smile for Sylvia, playing the part of the benevolent ruler. Then she gives her a little head pat, which completely resets Sylvia's brain. The rumors are already flying through the castle corridors like wildfire. Down in the dining hall, everyone is whispering about the Empress's new attitude. She thinks about how different this is from her original life, and keeps moving. She does a quick turn, feeling everyone's eyes boring into her back. Time to head out. She's got a palace to manage and an emperor to handle. At the banquet, the nobles are too busy gossiping to even look at their plates. Angelica takes her spot on the throne, hiding behind her fan while Sylvia stands guard. She remembers the original story and how much it's starting to spin out of control. Those green eyes are sharp as a blade over the edge of her fan. Sitting there on that huge throne, she looks a lot more isolated than she probably feels. Ranielo's just off to the side, wearing that look that says he's found his new favorite toy. She puts on her best Empress smile for the crowd, playing them like a fiddle. But as soon as the fan goes up, you can tell she's completely exhausted. She drops a comment that leaves Sylvia looking totally blindsided. She flashes a confident grin, making sure everyone knows who's really in charge. One of the ladies is so shocked she practically falls out of her chair. The rest of the room is just as stunned by her sudden show of authority. Angelica just laughs, making light of the fact that she just terrified half the room. She takes a cool sip of tea, letting the silence hang there for a second. The head maid keeps the tea flowing while Angelica keeps up the act. She looks regally composed, but you know she's counting down the seconds until this is over. Out of nowhere, one of the delegates bows so low he might actually hit the ground. She looks over and spots some new faces that definitely weren't invited. Her eyes go wide as she realizes exactly who just walked into the room. Ranielo leans in close, reminding her that he's the only one she needs to worry about. He's looking at her with a look that's half obsessive and half terrifying. It's clear he can finally see her. Ranielo's still carrying her like she's some kind of prize, not even breaking a sweat. He doesn't even blink at the maids' shocked faces as he hauls her through the hall bridal style. From the outside, you'd never guess the kind of madness going on inside these palace walls. She's completely out of it, just leaning into him while the staff watches on in dead silence. He brushes right past them without a word, making sure everyone knows who the Empress belongs to. Angelica's just trying to process everything that's happened. Her brain is basically fried. She can still feel his predatory gaze on her, those red eyes seeing right through her facade. She wakes up in bed feeling like she's been hit by a truck, with Ranielo just sitting there. He's looking way too comfortable for someone who is just hunting people for sport. He gives her a little head pat, which is surprisingly gentle for a literal monster. She bolts upright, clutching the sheets like they're the only thing keeping her safe. She's trying to stay composed, but her inner self is absolutely losing it right now. He just chuckles at her reaction, finding her panic way more entertaining than he should. She watches him closely, trying to figure out if he's being serious or just playing with his food. She forces a laugh, hoping that playing along will keep her alive for a few more hours. Her mind wanders to the original story, specifically the arrival of the Saintess, Serafina. In the novel, Serafina was the one who was supposed to be the center of this entire world. But looking at Ranielo's smirk, it's clear the plot has already gone completely off the rails. Somewhere far away, the temple is probably already preparing for their big delegation. The thought of the original protagonist showing up makes her stomach do total flips. She looks at Ranielo wondering if he's even capable of following a script anymore. One look into those red eyes and you know he doesn't care about fate, or destiny. She's the only one who knows what's supposed to happen, and that is terrifying. Even in her head, she's practically bowing down just to stay on his good side. She looks away, the weight of the future starting to feel really heavy on her shoulders. The original female lead was supposed to meet him in the winter, according to the book. But here they are, months early, and he's already way too obsessed with the wrong person. She sits there in the quiet room, trying to make sense of the absolute mess she's in. He nudges her chin up, forcing her to look him right in the eye again. It's a silent battle of wills, and she's pretty sure she's already lost. She grips the covers tight, realizing she can't just hide away from her new reality. The social scene is basically a disaster zone now that she's won the human hunt. She spends her days buried in books, looking for any clue on how to handle the temple. Every time she reads about the saintess, her anxiety spikes right through the roof. She keeps repeating the names in her head, Tunia, Seraphina, like a warning. One more page and she's probably going to have a full-blown panic attack. In the original story, the saintess was always protected by her loyal knight, Eden. But this book she's reading has way more information about monsters than heroes. She sighs and keeps digging, hoping for a miracle or at least a decent plan. She remembers the parts of the novel where innocent people were trampled by actual monsters. She looks at the map, trying to visualize the path the holy delegation will take. She knows she has to be ready for them, because her survival depends on it. Ranielo's mapping out the route to wipe out the monsters, which unfortunately means a trip straight through Tunia. Angelica is already imagining him meeting the real female lead, Seraphina, and leaving her behind for good. Just the thought of her life being upended by the original plot is enough to put her in a gloomy mood. She tries to keep her composure while walking through the palace, but her anxiety is visible in every step. Ranielo's got that look on his face again, the one that usually means someone is about to have a very bad day. She tries to play the part of the happy empress, but her internal monologue is just one long, silent scream. Everything about her life is starting to feel like it's being scripted by a literal madman. She practically jumps out of her skin when he suddenly leans in, her nerves frayed to the absolute breaking point. He takes her hand with a sharp clasp, a gesture that feels way more like a claim than a comfort. Ranielo sits on his throne like he owns the entire world, looking completely unimpressed by everything. The high priest bows so low, he's practically kissing the floor, clearly terrified of saying the wrong thing. From a distance, they look like a powerful royal couple, but Angelica is just trying to survive the next 5 minutes. Her thoughts drift to Eden, the man the novel described as Seraphina's tragic first love. He was supposed to be the perfect holy knight, a hero who stayed true to his vows until the bitter end. But in the original story, his noble spirit didn't get him very far against the Emperor's cruelty. According to the book, Ranielo was the one who ended his life, leaving Seraphina completely heartbroken. Angelica can't help but feel a wave of dread, knowing that she's now part of this messy, violent timeline. Eden's face in her memories is full of the kind of sincerity that just doesn't exist in Ranielo's court. Ranielo watches the room with a cold, calculating gaze, his true intentions hidden behind a sharp smirk. The priest looks like he's about to faint when the Emperor gives him a flat-out no to his latest request. He reaches out a hand, and the entire room goes dead silent as they wait to see what he'll do next. The nobles start murmuring among themselves, their whispers filled with a mix of shock and pure fear. Angelica forces an awkward smile, trying her best to act like this kind of tension is totally normal. Ranielo's grin widens as he demands to know why everyone is just standing there staring at him. The whispering intensifies, and Angelica can feel the judgment of the entire court burning into her. She tries to keep her expression neutral, but her mind is racing through a dozen different escape plans. Then, with a heavy step, the Holy Knight and his companions move toward the imperial throne. He falters for a moment, clearly overwhelmed by the dark aura radiating from the Emperor. They all sink to the floor in a deep bow, submitting to Ranielo's overwhelming and terrifying power. The Emperor's laughter rings out, sharp and mocking, echoing off the high stone walls of the chamber. Angelica lets out a strained ha-ha of her own, desperately trying to blend in with the local madness. The whole scene is a chaotic mess of fear and power plays that she's only barely managing to navigate. It's a massive relief to finally be back at the Empress Palace, away from the prying eyes of the court. She sits at her desk, staring into space as she tries to process the absolute mess she's in. She remembers the book describing Eden as stubborn and rebellious, the worst possible traits for this palace. If she doesn't do something soon, she knows exactly how his tragic story is going to end. She takes a deep breath and looks at her reflection, trying to find the strength to keep playing her role. Her maids scurry around her, their quiet chatter a stark contrast to the heavy tension in the throne room. The announcement is official. The delegates from Tunya will be staying in the capital for 10 days. She realizes she can't just hide. As an Actolin now, she has to welcome the guests properly. She looks out at the sky, her determination flickering as she thinks about the disaster that's coming. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out to her, and she feels Ranielo's cold presence right behind her. Ranielo's acting weirdly affectionate, staying close while they walk through the rose garden. He suddenly grabs her by the shoulders, stopping her in her tracks. He flashes a smile, but Angelica knows better than to trust this sudden, doting act. Later that evening, she tries to stay calm while they have tea. She puts on her best obedient wife face, hoping he can't sense her heart racing. Ranielo lounges back and asks what her big plan was for dinner. She mentions inviting some elders from the clergy, keeping her answer as boring as possible. She laughs it off, trying to make the arrangements seem completely innocent. He doesn't seem fully convinced, but decides to head back inside anyway. Angelica takes a breath the second he's gone, her mind already on her next move. He sits down, still looking completely bored with everything around him. He catches her hand, a silent reminder that he's always watching her. The moment she's alone, Angelica practically collapses from the sheer stress. She remembers how close he got. It felt more like a threat than an embrace. Her maid, Sisan, is already in position, hiding in the bushes to keep watch. A holy knight approaches, his heavy armor clanking as he walks through the grounds. This is Eden, the man Angelica suspects is hiding a major secret. She steps out from the shadows, calling him over for a private word. Eden looks back at her, his expression unreadable as he stops. She doesn't waste time and confronts him about the forbidden books he's been reading. The knight freezes, clearly not expecting the Empress to catch him in a lie. He starts talking about names given by God, sounding a lot like someone who doesn't belong here. Angelica realizes she was right, this guy isn't acting like a character from the novel at all. She leans in, whispering a name from the real world that only another transmigrator would know. The shock on his face says it all. He's just as surprised as she is. Turns out, Eden is actually Choi Yun, another soul trapped in this story. They both feel a massive sense of relief to finally have an ally who knows the truth. They talk in low voices, trying to figure out how they both ended up here. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Ranielo is already noticing his wife's absence. Sisan is sweating bullets when she sees the Emperor approaching with that cold look. He asks where the Empress went, and the poor maid can barely form a sentence. Back in the garden, Eden tells Angelica about his time at the Temple of Tunya. She tries to act cheerful, but she knows they're playing a dangerous game. Eden looks worried, realizing just how much danger Angelica is in by being married to that demon. She asks him if he's seen Serafina, the girl who's supposed to be the actual main character. He confirms he's been keeping the Saintess away from the palace to sabotage the original plot. They agree to a secret alliance before he turns to leave her. Angelica watches him go, feeling a tiny spark of hope for the first time. She heads back, putting her mask on and preparing to face her husband again. Ranielo is waiting for her, sitting like a predator ready to pounce. She tries to act like nothing's wrong, but the tension in the room is suffocating. He leans in, his face inches from hers, letting her know he isn't buying her act for a second. Angelica's back in the palace, and the air is thick with tension as Ranielo looms over her. He reaches out, his hand brushing against her hair as she flinches away. She waits for the other shoe to drop while he watches her every move with a cold intensity. She can barely catch her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. To her surprise, he drops to one knee, but it feels more like a predator closing in than a romantic gesture. The stress finally breaks her, and she starts to tear up right in front of him. He suddenly pulls her into a crushing hug, effectively marking his territory. It's a dark, heavy embrace that makes her feel more like a prisoner than an empress. The next day, the palace looks peaceful enough, surrounded by blooming roses under the bright sun. Ranielo takes her out for a walk in the garden, but it's anything but relaxing. The knights, including Eden, are caught off guard by the Emperor's sudden arrival. Ranielo walks past them with his arm around Angelica, making sure everyone sees how close they are. He puts on a massive show of affection for the benefit of the surrounding audience. He grabs her hand to pull her in even tighter, his gaze never wavering from her face. He gives her a doting pat on the head, though his eyes remain sharp and calculating. He even starts playing with her hair, acting incredibly lovey-dovey in front of the knights. Eden watches the whole scene, looking completely suspicious of this sudden change in the Emperor's behavior. They lean in so close it looks like they're about to kiss right there in public. The other knights are stunned into silence, unable to believe what they're seeing from their cold ruler. Ranielo shoots a sharp glare back at the men, letting them know exactly who Angelica belongs to. Eden flinches, clearly feeling the weight of that murderous, possessive gaze. Angelica is still gasping for air, struggling to keep up with his intense pace. He smirks, clearly enjoying the chaos he's causing in everyone's minds. He strides away, dragging her along as the knights watch them disappear. Once they're alone again, the weight of the situation starts to sink in for her. She's a nervous wreck, clutching her head as she tries to plan her next move. She shows Cézanne a letter she received, her hands visibly shaking as she holds it up. She's trembling so hard she can barely keep a grip on the paper. Thinking about Eden and their secret alliance just makes her headache even more. She finally rips the letter to shreds to erase any evidence of her secret meetings. Exhausted, she slumps into the maid's lap, completely drained from the constant acting. She starts explaining the situation to Cézanne, trying to make sense of Ranielo's weird behavior. She thinks back to how he used to treat her distant and cold while sitting on his throne. Then there's Eden, the only person who actually understands where she's coming from. Cézanne is moved to tears, relieved to hear that her mistress has a plan to survive. Angelica reassures her with a gentle smile, telling her that everything's going to be fine. Little does she know, Ranielo is just outside the door, listening to every word they say. She gives a genuine laugh, unaware of the predator lurking right in the hallway. He lingers by the door, looking more intrigued by her than he's ever been. Cézanne wipes away her tears, happy to see Angelica finally looking a bit more relaxed. The two of them lean in close over their tea, trying to keep their conversation private. As night falls over the palace, the stars come out, but the danger is far from over. Angelica forces a laugh, trying to play along with Ranielo's bewildering new persona. Her amusement vanishes when he suddenly leans back, settling his head comfortably on her lap. She manages to keep a smile on her face, but she's internally panicking as she looks down at him. He reaches up and takes a lock of her hair, bringing it to his face in a gesture that feels more like a claim than a caress. As he taps his cheek, she nervously wonders if he actually expects her to pet him like some kind of house pet. She tentatively rests her hand on his head, watching him carefully as he closes his eyes in contentment. She starts to pet him, feeling like she's playing a dangerous game with a sleeping lion. She stares off into the distance, her expression turning somber as she realizes she's becoming further entangled in his life. Ranielo sits up and takes her hand, his intensity softening into a look that is far too tender for comfort. Reaching her limit, Angelica snaps and demands to be exiled to another country if he won't stop pestering her. She immediately slumps in defeat, realizing that her outburst likely fell on deaf ears. Sure enough, Ranielo responds with a smug, almost delighted smile, clearly enjoying her defiance. She looks at him in pure shock, unable to understand why her rejection only seems to encourage him. In a last-ditch effort to keep the peace, she gently strokes his cheek, her touch hesitant and fearful. He responds by pulling her into a sudden, forceful hug, effectively silencing any further protests. As she's held against him, she desperately reminds herself not to be fooled by this act and to remember his true, murderous nature. He squeezes her even tighter, a silent declaration that he will never allow her to leave his side. The next morning, the grand palace towers under a clear sky, but Angelica's mood remains overcast. To her horror, Ranielo continues his doting husband act in public, even as they walk through the palace halls. He wears a self-satisfied grin, clearly relishing the confusion he's causing everyone around them. Angelica looks on in total bewilderment, struggling to reconcile this man with the villain she knows him to be. Back in her private quarters, she lets out a frustrated scream, clutching her hair as she tries to process his behavior. She realizes he's acting exactly like a stereotypical male lead from a cheesy romance novel, which feels utterly surreal. Completely spent, she flops face first onto her bed, wishing she could just sleep through this nightmare. She rolls onto her side, staring into space as she tries to come up with a new survival strategy. Across the palace, Ranielo sits in the dark, nursing a glass of wine with a cold, thoughtful expression. The next day, Angelica tries to clear her head by walking in the gardens, but she can't escape her thoughts. Ranielo continues to drink alone by the window, his silhouette illuminated by the cold light of the moon. He sits motionless in his massive study, looking every bit the dangerous emperor he was destined to be. Determined to find a way out, Angelica makes her way to the Actilus Imperial Library. She peers through the ornate windows of the library, hoping to find some secret knowledge that can help her. She buries herself in an old book, her face pale with worry as she scans the pages for any loophole. Her heart nearly stops when Ranielo suddenly appears out of nowhere, looking down at her with a mischievous glint in his eyes. She flinches as he leans over her chair, his presence instantly suffocating her. He props his chin on his hand and stares at her, making it clear that he isn't going to let her study in peace. She looks up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of annoyance and genuine fear. He gives her a serene, knowing smile that makes her skin crawl. Unable to contain herself, she lets out a shocked shout at his persistent intrusion. She stands up and backs away, clutching her chest as she tries to regain her composure. Her face is a mask of frantic desperation as she realizes he's followed her even here. He leans in close, his face inches from hers, as he continues to push his way into her personal space. Her heart hammers in her chest like a trapped bird as she stares back at him, feeling more cornered than ever. Ranielo leans in even closer, his gaze lingering on Angelica as he continues his unnervingly affectionate behavior. Soon after, an imperial procession begins its journey across the rugged mountain range that separates Actilis and Somvenia. Leading the way is Ranielo himself, a striking and formidable figure atop his white steed. Inside the carriage, Angelica lets out a heavy sigh, the long journey only adding to her mental exhaustion. Her thoughts drift to Sylvia, the woman who was supposed to be the center of Ranielo's attention in the original story. She can't help but feel a sense of guilt and confusion as she imagines Sylvia's tragic path while she herself is trapped in this new reality. In her mind, she sees a version of herself sneaking away, desperate to escape the inevitable drama that surrounds the imperial family. Meanwhile, Sylvia Jacques, now reduced to the status of a maid, works tirelessly in the background, her own future uncertain. Angelica shakes off the thoughts and tries to maintain her composure, offering a soft, weary smile to the world outside her window. The Imperial Knights stand at attention as the procession reaches its destination under the bright afternoon sun. Ranielo's expression remains unreadable, his red eyes sharp as he surveys the area. He dismounts and approaches Angelica's carriage, reaching out to help her down with a practiced, knightly charm. As night falls, he calls for her, leading her away from the safety of her chambers and into the dark, silent woods. He takes her hand in a firm grip, his leather-gloved fingers interlocking with hers in a way that feels both protective and possessive. Angelica follows him, her heart racing as they venture deeper into the quiet, starlit garden. She struggles to keep up, her breath coming in short, ragged pants as the cold night air hits her lungs. The path ahead is shrouded in shadows and blooming flowers, illuminated only by the faint glow of the moon. Suddenly, she stops in her tracks, her eyes widening as she catches sight of something truly magnificent. Ranielo turns back to her with a gentle smile, his voice soft as he asks if she agrees that small, sparkling things are beautiful. She is speechless, her breath catching in her throat as she looks up at the scene before her. High above them, the night sky is alive with a swirling nebula of vibrant colors and countless shimmering stars. Under the ethereal glow of the celestial display, Ranielo watches her with a look of genuine, if unsettling, adoration. Ranielo leads Angelica out into a field of glowing white flowers under the night sky. She tries to keep a polite smile on her face, though she looks a little strained. Angelica hitches up her heavy skirts to navigate the dense blossoms. A swarm of glowing blue butterflies flutters around her as she stops. Suddenly, Ranielo pulls her close, his face just inches from hers. He leans in, their lips nearly touching. He tilts his head, closing the gap. Ranielo cups her face with his gloved hand and kisses her. His other hand pulls her in tight by the waist. The kiss leaves Angelica breathless, her eyes wide with shock. They end up on the ground among the flowers, with Ranielo looming over her. He stares down at her with those sharp, red eyes. He leans down to kiss her again, more intensely this time. He pulls back with a dark, satisfied smirk. He gently strokes her temple, his expression unreadable. His hands move to the neckline of her dress. He grips her arm firmly, keeping her pinned in place. Angelica's heart hammers against her ribs as she gasps. Ranielo looks away, speaking as if the moment was nothing special. She blinks, trying to process what he just said. He looks down, a hint of boredom returning to his face. He stands up and mentions that these flowers only shine in the moonlight. Angelica sits up, still flushed and confused by his sudden shift in mood. He turns back and touches her cheek again, his smile returning. The touch makes her face heat up even more. He turns away, done with his little display of affection. Ranielo watches her with a look of predatory amusement. He gives her a final, chilling smile. The scene shifts to a bright morning outside a grand estate. Ranielo and Angelica are ready for travel, being seen off by a man in religious garb. Ranielo keeps a possessive hand on her shoulder as they walk. Angelica looks uneasy, but Ranielo just looks ahead with a confident grin. The sounds of horses and marching feet fill the air as the expedition begins. They ride through a village together, Ranielo holding the reins behind her. A line of armored knights follows them, creating quite a spectacle for the locals. Angelica stares down, feeling the heavy weight of the situation. Ranielo leans in to whisper something to her as they continue. He reaches out and pats her head, treating her more like a pet than an empress. He smirks, seemingly pleased with her quiet obedience. Angelica touches her forehead, her face turning pink as she thinks back to the night before. She walks through the encampment, lost in her own thoughts. Suddenly, a hand reaches out and grabs her by the wrist. Ranielo suddenly grabs her and clamps his hand over her mouth to keep her from making a sound. He pulls her close, his eyes reflecting a dangerous kind of curiosity as he hushes her. He lets her go, but his presence is still suffocating as he starts questioning her. Angelica tries to stay calm, but it's hard when her husband looks like he's about to snap. She whispers a quick explanation, hoping to steer his suspicion away. She can tell he's not entirely convinced, and that's the most terrifying part. Ranielo just stares at her, his expression cold and unreadable. The tension between them is thick enough to cut with a knife. His gaze lingers on her, making it clear she's under his total control. Later that evening, a decadent steak dinner is prepared for them. Angelica stares at her plate, her appetite completely gone after the confrontation. Across the table, Ranielo sits with his blonde hair shining under the candlelight. He watches her eat, his red eyes never leaving her face for even a second. Angelica's mind is already racing, dreading the moment they retire to their room. Back in the bedroom, she looks at the massive bed and feels more like a prisoner than an empress. She covers her ears and lets out a silent scream of pure frustration. She eventually slumps onto the bed, her energy completely spent. Ranielo enters the room, carrying a wooden mug and looking remarkably calm. He offers her a drink, his voice sounding deceptively kind. He sets the mug down on the bedside table with a firm clatter. He picks up a piece of food and holds it out for her to take. Angelica takes a bite, knowing it's better to just go along with whatever he wants. Ranielo watches her eat, his expression softening into something almost affectionate. He reaches out, his hand moving slowly toward her face. He gently raises her chin, forcing her to look him in the eye. Suddenly, he pulls her close, his grip firm and possessive. Their faces are inches apart as she hears her own heart thumping in her ears. He leans over her, his presence completely overwhelming. Ranielo stares into her eyes, his red pupils glowing with intensity. He sits back on the edge of the bed, watching her like she's a fascinating new puzzle. Angelica stares at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. The silence in the room is heavy with unspoken threats. She tries to say something to lighten the mood, but her voice falters. Ranielo just gives her a dark, knowing smile. She flinches as he moves, her body tense and ready for anything. He sits there for a moment, just looking at her, before he moves again. Suddenly, he pulls her into a sudden, tight embrace. He holds her head against his shoulder, resting his chin on her hair. Angelica's heart races as she feels the crushing weight of his obsession. He squeezes her tighter, as if trying to prove that she belongs to him and no one else. She stares ahead with a blank expression, realized she's truly trapped in this golden cage. Ranielo leans in, whispering a final chilling warning into her ear. Ranielo remains on the edge of the bed, his presence looming over Angelica like a predator. Suddenly, a figure in a white veil enters the room, holding a golden tray. Angelica is so startled by the intrusion that she nearly drops the cover in her hand. The atmosphere in the room shifts, accompanied by an ominous rattling sound. A dark vision flashes through her mind, a foot crushing someone's head with a sickening bump. Ranielo smiles darkly, his hand resting near his chest as he enjoys her visible fear. Angelica gasps, her hand flying to her throat as she struggles to remain composed. "You think?" Ranielo asks, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. Another memory of the novel's original hero flickers in her mind, his eyes filled with pain. Eden? She whispers, the reality of the story she's trapped in becoming more vivid. She sees a vision of the saintess, Seraphina, standing there like a mournful ghost. But the vision fades, leaving her alone with her husband's intense, red-eyed gaze. Ranielo smirks, his face inches from hers as he relishes his control over her. This is strange. Angelica thinks, her mind racing to make sense of the original lead's appearances. She starts to cough, her vision blurring as she wonders why Ranielo and Serafina are haunting her thoughts. Ranielo's hand makes a sharp sound as he roughly grabs her chin. He stares down at her with a mix of obsession and cold calculation. Angelica gasps for air, her body trembling under the weight of his grip. Her fingers shake uncontrollably as she tries to find some sort of stability. Ranielo looms over her on the bed, his presence a suffocating shadow. The next morning, the palace is peaceful, but Angelica's ordeal is far from over. She looks at the mirror, her hand moving to the red marks left on her neck. She clenches her jaw, determined to hide the evidence of Ranielo's possessiveness. She puts on her traveling cloak, preparing herself for the upcoming expedition. A priest greets her at the assembly point, asking if she rested well. She stands before him, looking every bit the composed empress. She offers a polite smile, concealing the turmoil raging inside her. Ranielo appears, clad in black armor and looking ready for war. He watches her with a possessive gaze, making sure she stays by his side. Angelica catches his look and feels the familiar weight of his obsession. She laughs brightly, playing the part of a loving wife to the crowd. But her eyes betray a hint of the exhaustion and fear she's trying to hide. Ranielo grabs her hand and squeezes it tightly, a silent command to stay in line. They make a grand entrance as the leaders of the winter hunt expedition. He turns away abruptly, his focus shifting back to the mission ahead. Angelica waves to the onlookers, her cheerful expression a carefully constructed mask. She tries to find comfort in the sunlight, though it does little to warm her heart. The Imperial Army begins its march, the sound of galloping horses filling the air. Eden watches from the ranks, his eyes fixed on the distant sanctuary. Ranielo looks forward with a grim, determined expression, his red eyes focused. The soldiers murmur in anticipation as they head toward the monster-infested lands. A vision of the future, Ranielo standing victoriously over a field of slain demons. Eden raises his blade, his expression set in a grim line as the battle against the monsters begins. Ranielo stands unfazed even as a large, monstrous shadow looms directly behind him. A knight raises his sword toward the sky, the command to strike echoing across the field. Ranielo points his glowing blade forward, his voice cold as he commands his troops to advance. A knight with a red plume charges into the thick of the fray, let out a fierce battle cry. With a ruthless swing, Ranielo cuts through the air, his eyes glowing with a dark bloodlust. The army reaches a grand temple, but the site is infested with strange, pulsating pods. A scout peers through his binoculars and gulps in fear at the sheer number of monsters. Ranielo simply smirks, the sight of the slaughter only fueling his twisted sense of amusement. Screeches and the clang of steel fill the air as the knights engage the demons near the temple pillars. A knight desperately clashes his blade against a monster's claws in a struggle for survival. Ranielo strides through the carnage, his heavy boots stomping on the blood-soaked ground as his men shout their loyalty. He delivers a devastating slash, effortlessly tearing through a demon's flesh with a spray of blood. "Yes, sir!" the soldiers respond in unison, following their emperor deeper into the darkness. Ranielo looks back over the field of fallen foes, a cold, satisfied smile playing on his lips. After the skirmish, his expression turns serious as he contemplates the nature of his prey. A heavy silence falls as he narrowed his red eyes, his mind already drifting to his true obsession. Eden whispers to himself, "I don't know who the real," his thoughts full of growing suspicion. That night, a pale moon hangs in the sky, casting long shadows over the silent sanctuary. Eden finds himself standing before a wall covered in strange, veined pods that seem to pulse. He raises his lantern, the warm light revealing his anxious but determined face. He quickly turns, checking the darkness to ensure he is truly alone in his investigation. He creeps through the silent halls, the light of his lantern dancing across the ancient walls. He stops in front of a heavy door, wondering if he has finally found the entrance to the secrets he seeks. Back at the sanctuary library, a hidden door stands locked, blocking the only way out of this empire. Eden studies the entrance, knowing the price for freedom is higher than they expected. To open it, they need the blood of the Emperor himself, the one man they can't afford to cross. On his throne, Ranielo looks every bit the predator he's rumored to be. Eden realizes that if he wants to save Angelica, he might actually have to kill a god. A guard suddenly calls out, breaking the silence and catching him off guard. The soldier looks suspicious, questioning why a priest is lurking around the restricted areas. Eden keeps his expression cold, refusing to show even a hint of guilt. Outside, the sun begins to set over the sprawling palace grounds. Meanwhile, Angelica visits the infirmary to check on the soldiers wounded in the recent hunt. One of the men thanks her for coming, but his eyes are filled with a strange unease. He tells her the horrific truth. The hatchlings are forced to imprint on the soldiers before being fed their own mothers. It's a twisted way to ensure the monsters only obey their human masters. Angelica listens in stunned silence, realizing the depth of the Emperor's cruelty. The news is too much to handle, and she accidentally knocks a bottle of medicine off the table. Her maids rush to her side, panicked by the Empress's sudden distress. Suzanne is visibly shaking as she gathers the fallen pills, her hands trembling with fear. Seeing the girl's terror, Angelica realizes everyone in this palace is just a mistake away from execution. Later, the two walk down the long, empty corridor together. Suzanne finally speaks up, her voice small and filled with desperation. She begs Angelica for help, admitting she can't take the constant pressure anymore. Angelica stops, seeing a reflection of her own struggle in the young maid's eyes. Suzanne recalls the brutality of palace life, the constant abuse and being treated like dirt. She was forced to swallow her pride and endure the unendurable just to stay alive. Hearing about the monsters was the final straw. She realized she's just as disposable to the Emperor. Angelica offers a rare moment of empathy, her usual cold mask slipping away. The maid looks up, surprised to find a kindred spirit in the woman she feared most. She breaks down, sobbing loudly as she releases months of pent-up trauma. Angelica holds her, promising that she won't let another innocent person suffer if she can help it. But the Emperor's trail of victims is long, and women like Sylvia are still nursing their resentment. In this world, those who aren't strong enough are simply crushed underfoot. Seeking a way to break the cycle, Angelica returns to the library to search for answers. She scans the endless rows of books, looking for anything the original story might have hidden. A title catches her eye, and she feels a strange pull toward a dark corner. A single volume falls from the shelf, landing with a heavy thud in the silence. She picks it up, her fingers brushing against the worn leather cover. It's the author's note from the original novel, titled "The Flower That Blooms Even in the Abyss." As she touches it, the book begins to glow with an intense, magical light. Meanwhile, Ranielo leads his army through the winter snow, already miles away on his expedition. The book reveals the arrival of the Saintess, the girl meant to replace Angelica in the Emperor's heart. Then, the vision turns dark, showing a blood-stained blade and a life cut short. Angelica stares at the page in absolute horror, reading the exact details of her own gruesome end. Ranielo's sudden appearance in the library is a nightmare made flesh. Angelica's heart stops as she realizes she's been caught with the one thing that could reveal her secrets. He leans down, his smirk promising nothing but trouble as he toys with her. She nearly collapses from the sheer terror, her legs shaking as she tries to find her balance. A vision of her former self flashes before her eyes, a girl who was happy before this world chewed her up. But there's no escaping the shadow of the Emperor, not when he's this obsessed with her. She stays on the floor, frantically trying to hide the book before he can see the title. Ranielo towers over her, a dark presence that seems to drain the light from the room. He stares her down, his silence more terrifying than any threat. Before she can crawl away, he grabs her arm, pinning her in place. His attention turns to the book she was hiding, his gloved hand reaching out to take it. Angelica's mind goes blank, her chest tightening as she wonders how she'll ever explain this. She flinches as he snatches the volume, dreading the moment he sees her name on those cursed pages. She watches his face intently, her breath hitching as he examines the text. But he just looks confused, eventually closing the book and leading her out of the library. She realizes with a wave of relief that the words are invisible to him. It truly is a message meant only for her. Ranielo stops on the stairs, glancing back at her with a look of mild suspicion. They leave the sanctuary, but the weight of the book's prophecy still hangs heavy over her head. That night, the Emperor's affection feels more like a trap than a comfort. As they lie in bed, Angelica stares into the darkness, knowing she's living with a monster. She realizes that his sharp eyes will eventually see through her shallow lies if she doesn't act fast. The next morning, they sit together in the palace gardens, but the atmosphere is far from peaceful. Ranielo casually strokes her hair while explaining that he would kill any child they fathered just to keep the bloodline strong. The sheer coldness of his words leaves Angelica speechless, her escape plan becoming a matter of life and death. She begins her move, meeting with Countess Docino to secure a hiding spot outside the palace. Ranielo watches his prey from afar, unaware that she's already plotting her disappearance. Angelica plays the part of the perfect, sickly empress, drawing the Countess into her confidence. She's startled when Ranielo suddenly appears behind her, his presence always felt before he's seen. He pulls her into a tight hug, a public display of ownership that makes her skin crawl. Nearby, Eden makes his own preparations, coordinating with the noblewoman to ensure the logistics are sound. Angelica hands the Countess a book, using it as a cover for their secret negotiations. Eden keeps a close watch on the exchange, ready to intervene if anything goes south. He speaks with the Countess, his calm demeanor helping to soothe any of her lingering doubts. He gives Angelica a subtle nod, confirming that the first stage of the plan is complete. The stress of the deception starts to take its toll, making Angelica's head spin. Eden notices her struggle and remains by her side, a silent anchor in a sea of lies. She feels like a marionette with too many hands pulling at her strings. Countess Docino is completely taken in by Angelica's act, gasping at her tragic situation. While the Emperor prepares for his winter expedition, the two women finalize their secret arrangement. Angelica takes the noblewoman's hands in hers, sealing their alliance with a fake smile. They whisper the final details of where she'll hide once she makes her move. With everything in place, Angelica looks toward the horizon, knowing the real hunt is about to begin. Ranielo remains a constant, looming presence, even when he isn't speaking. Angelica confides in Cézanne, her voice low as she discusses her next move. Cézanne leans in, her expression a mix of surprise and concern as she listens to the Empress's plan. Angelica glances back, making sure they aren't being overheard by the palace guards. The door opens, and the Emperor enters, his blonde hair catching the light as he fixes his red eyes on his wife. He takes her hand with a chilling smile, a gesture that feels more like a claim than a comfort. As October arrives, the air in the Actilus Empire grows colder, matching the atmosphere within the palace. Angelica wakes in a cold sweat, the nightmares of her predicted execution refusing to leave her. She clutches her chest, trying to slow her racing heart as the darkness of the room closes in. Ranielo is there in the shadows, his hand tightening around hers in a silent, possessive grip. Tears of frustration and fear track down her cheeks as she realizes how trapped she truly is. He pulls her closer, his presence a suffocating weight that she can never seem to escape. He runs a hand through her hair, a rare moment of tenderness that only serves to remind her of his volatility. Outside, the moonlight bathes the cathedral-like spires of the sanctuary in a ghostly glow. The next morning, Ranielo watches her with interest as she prepares for the day. Angelica forces a bright, empty smile, playing the part of the devoted empress perfectly. She leans against him, hiding her true intentions behind a mask of affection. He pats her head, seemingly satisfied with her performance for now. Seizing a moment of apparent good humor, she asks him if she can visit her friend the following day. The night sky stretches over the empire, vast and indifferent to the schemes being woven beneath it. Cézanne watches from the shadows, her duty to the Empress warring with the danger they both face. She leans against the wall, eyes closed as she mentally prepares for the risky task ahead. Count Felon observes the palace staff with a discerning eye, his own role in the court's power struggle still hidden. He walks through the halls with authority, the servants bowing low as he passes. He stops to question a maid, his polite exterior masking a sharp and calculating mind. With a click of his heels, he continues on his way, satisfied with the information he's gathered. Cézanne watches him go, her brow furrowed in suspicion as she wonders where his loyalties truly lie. At his desk, Count Felon meticulously records his observations, his quill scratching against the parchment. The rhythmic sound of horses announces the start of Angelica's journey away from the palace. Seated within the velvet interior of the carriage, Angelica watches the palace walls recede. Elsewhere, Eden kneels before his superiors, the gravity of his secret mission weighing heavily on his shoulders. He keeps his gaze lowered, a silent warrior for a cause that few understand. The carriage rattles along the uneven roads, the rhythmic motion doing little to soothe Angelica's nerves. She steps out of the carriage at her destination, her movements graceful despite her internal turmoil. She is greeted warmly and escorted to a plush sitting room where the air is thick with the scent of expensive tea. Count Felon leans in, offering a small pleasantry as they begin their meeting. Cézanne stays close by, her presence a silent reminder of the support Angelica still has. Angelica takes a small bite of a pastry, her nerves making it difficult to keep her hands steady. She looks at her host, carefully gauging the reaction to the Empress's presence. Steeling herself, She looks her companion in the eye, ready to make her request. She explains her desire to avoid unnecessary travel within the Empire, a hint of her true plan buried in her words. Dressed in a magnificent gown, she walks through the halls, every step a calculated move toward freedom. A jagged fragment of memory flashes before Angelica, a vision of a hand reaching through shattered glass. Count Felon adjusts his bow tie, his gaze fixed on the Empress as they continue their private conversation. Angelica lets out a gasp, her green eyes wide with shock at the weight of the secrets being shared. "How could I ever say that to him again?" she cries out, her voice filled with a desperate, mounting dread. She looks down the long, empty corridor of her future, seeing only the cold stones of a path she never chose. Angelica steels herself, the fear in her eyes replaced by a grim, new determination to survive at any cost. Count Felon offers a smooth, practiced smile, his charming exterior hiding the true nature of his ambitions. Angelica looks at him, her mind racing as she tries to decipher the hidden meaning behind his every word. The name of the original heroine, Serafina, echoes in her mind, a reminder of the story she is trying to rewrite. In the world of the novel, Serafina was known as the Sword of Tunia, the one destined to bring order to chaos. It was written that only Serafina's blade possessed the holy power to pierce Ranielo's impenetrable defenses. According to the prophecy, once the sacred blood of Actila is spilled, the Emperor's reign must come to a bloody end. Angelica's heart sinks as she contemplates the inevitable conclusion of the tale she once read. The vision of Ranielo's lifeless body haunts her, a necessary tragedy if she is to escape her own execution. Cézanne gasps, her hands flying to her mouth in horror as she realizes the Empress is actually plotting the Emperor's death. Count Felon watches her reaction with interest, his eyes sharp as he gauges the depth of her resolve. Angelica flinches under his scrutiny, the reality of her treasonous thoughts suddenly feeling very real and very dangerous. She forces an awkward smile, trying to mask her panic with a facade of noble composure. She remembers the way Ranielo looks at her, his obsession, a suffocating force that binds them together. And I must truly love him, she thinks, the bitter irony of her situation weighing heavy on her soul. She stands tall before Count Felon, the presence of Cézanne behind her providing a small measure of comfort. Count Felon remains stoic, his handsome face a mask of aristocratic indifference as he waits for her next move. With a sudden turn, Angelica lets out a hollow laugh, the sound echoing through the quiet room. She looks back over her shoulder, her expression a complex tapestry of beauty, sadness, and the iron will of a woman who refuses to die. Angelica knows time is running out. In about a month and a half, the original story says Ranielo will head out on his winter expedition. She stays buried in her maps, already tracing the path for her secret escape. Cézanne watches her mistress with a heavy heart, knowing exactly how much is at stake for them both. The Emperor suddenly strolls into the room, his presence immediately setting everyone on edge. Angelica forces a bright smile, doing her best to play the part of the devoted, healthy wife. He leans in close, placing his hands on her shoulders in a way that feels more like a threat than a comfort. Ranielo scans the maps on the table, his eyes sharp as he looks for any signs of her true intentions. He gets right in her personal space, his face just inches from hers as he talks about the journey ahead. He places his hand firmly over hers on the map, a silent reminder that everything here belongs to him. She looks up at him, her face a mask of fragile innocence, while her mind races to keep up. He points out a specific location on the map, his tone calm but full of underlying power. Angelica suddenly ducks her head, leaning against him as if overwhelmed by her failing health. She lets out a small shudder, leaning her forehead against him as he looks down at her with a cold eye. He lifts her chin with one hand, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. Outside, the palace is buzzing with news, and some are already offering their congratulations. Later, in the quiet of their bedroom, Ranielo lies back with his head on her lap. He keeps one eye on her, those red irises watching her every move like a predator. For a split second, Angelica lets her guard down, her face filled with an unspoken worry. He stares up at the ceiling, looking completely detached from the woman sitting right next to him. He suddenly sits up, his movements abrupt and full of purpose. He reaches out and firmly grasps her hand, pulling her back toward him. Ranielo looms over her on the bed, his expression unreadable as she looks up in surprise. He stares down into her eyes, his intense focus making it impossible for her to look away. She lies back on the pillows, her breath hitching as the weight of his presence sinks in. A satisfied smile crosses his face, looking like he's exactly where he wants to be. She manages a faint smile in return, though she looks more exhausted than happy. He leans down for a kiss, sealing her fate for the night as she lies there under him. Meanwhile, Sisan makes her way through the palace corridors, keeping her head down. She passes a group of other maids who are busy whispering and laughing about the day's rumors. She doesn't join in, clutching her apron as she hurries toward her secret meeting. Once night falls, she slips out into the garden, looking around to make sure she's alone. Inside, Eden is already waiting by the window, his expression grim as he watches the shadows. He flinches as he spots a figure moving outside, his hand flying to the curtain. Sisan stands in the cold, her heart pounding against her ribs as she waits for the right moment. The hallways are eerily silent, the moonlight barely cutting through the thick darkness. Suddenly, a heavy fist bangs against a door, the sound echoing through the quiet room. A young maid cracks the door open, looking pale and frightened at the late-night interruption. Eden doesn't wait for an explanation, grabbing her by the shoulder and pulling her inside. The girl stares at him in shock, her breath catching as he looms over her with an intense look. Sisan slips into the room a moment later, still wrapped in her dark traveling cloak. The three of them stand together in the dim light, the reality of their secret plan finally sinking in. Sisan stands firm with her arms crossed, her expression showing she's ready for whatever comes next. Angelica knows the clock is ticking, and she has to make every second count. Sisan looks on with a heavy heart, her worry for her mistress growing by the day. Inside a secret room, the maid meets with Eden and another staff member to finalize their plans. She knows exactly what the Emperor is capable of, having seen his cruelty firsthand. If they make even one mistake, their lives will be forfeit. She remembers the horror stories of how he treats those who bore him. But they were nothing more than entertainment. A man like that wouldn't hesitate to discard a person once their novelty wears off. Sisan turns to the others, her expression hardening as she realizes there's no turning back now. Suddenly, she lets out a hysterical laugh, the weight of their dangerous gamble finally sinking in. She stares ahead with a chilling determination. She won't let her mistress end up as just another victim. With a sweeping gesture, she tells the others that they have to be absolutely perfect. Eden and the maid watch her, caught somewhere between shock and fear at her sudden outburst. Far away from the cold palace walls, memories of a different life in a modern world seem like a dream. Back in the present, Angelica lies in bed with her husband, her hand resting over his heart. She nuzzles against his chest, playing the part of the adoring wife with terrifying precision. Ranielo looks down at her, his voice low and smooth as they share a moment of quiet. She gives him a wide, playful grin, hiding her true thoughts behind a mask of cheerfulness. He reaches out and intertwines his fingers with hers, a gesture that should be romantic, but feels like a chain. Lying back among the roses, she looks like a picture of contentment, but her mind is already miles away. He leans over her, his red eyes focused entirely on her as he agrees to her request. She looks up at him with wide, innocent eyes, making sure he believes every word she says. The sound of a heavy thud interrupts her thoughts, bringing her back to her training. On the palace grounds, Angelica takes up a bow, her expression serious as she prepares to fire. She lets out a long breath of relief after the shot, her hands steady despite the pressure. Ranielo watches her from a distance, his presence alone enough to make anyone falter. She turns around and acts surprised to see him, quickly hiding her focus. He doesn't say a word before pulling her into a sudden, deep kiss. Angelica's eyes fly open in shock, her hands frozen as she tries to process the sudden move. He follows up by patting her head, treating her with a strange kind of affection that's almost condescending. He looms over her once more, his intense gaze never wavering as he bids her farewell. The palace stands grand and imposing under the morning sun as preparations for her departure wrap up. Dressed in a fine pink travel outfit, Angelica says her final goodbyes, claiming she needs rest for her failing health. Ranielo gives her a smirk, seemingly amused by her sudden need for convalescence. She waves to him from the carriage, a small smile on her face as she finally puts some distance between them. He stands there alone, watching until the carriage is nothing more than a speck on the horizon. Their destination is a remote villa, far away from the prying eyes of the capital. Upon arrival, they are greeted by Lady Dosing, the Countess Docino, who looks thrilled to host the Empress. The Countess can hardly contain her excitement, ignoring the warnings of Duchess Nirma to keep her composure. She giggles to herself, already imagining the social status this favor will bring her once the news gets out. Lady Dosing welcomes Angelica into the grand foyer, gesturing wildly as she shows off her home. She laughs joyfully, clearly feeling like she's finally made it into the social elite. At dinner, she continues to fawn over the Empress, blissfully unaware of the dangerous game Angelica is actually playing. Ranielo Actilus's cold, piercing gaze is enough to freeze any soul in their tracks. Lady Dosing, the Countess Docino, finds herself trembling under his intense scrutiny. She flinches as he looms over her, his presence suffocatingly dominant. Yet, as he shifts, she wonders if their meeting was more than just a coincidence, her face flushing. A rare, slight smile from the Emperor is all it takes to completely ensnare her heart. Angelica knows how easily people are swayed by such simple gestures from a man like him. Under the cover of night, the palace becomes a labyrinth of secrets and shadows. A hand reaches out, gripped by the urgency of a plan that must not fail. Lady Dosing chuckles to herself in her room, lost in her own delusions of grandeur and favor. In the silence of their chambers, Angelica places a hand over Ranielo's heart, feeling the steady thrum of his life. He looks at her with a knowing smirk, as if he can see right through her carefully constructed facade. They lie together in the dim light, a scene of intimacy that hides a world of manipulation and survival. Later, while she pretends to be asleep, Angelica waits for the perfect moment to move. She carefully slides open a hidden drawer, her movements silent as a ghost. Her fingers close around a heavy ring of golden keys, the access she needs. These keys are the lifeline of her plan, the only way to ensure her temporary freedom. She remembers seeing Ranielo with them. His powerful frame, a constant reminder of the danger she's in. From the shadows, she watches the hallway, making sure the coast is clear before continuing her charade. Back at the villa, Lady Dosing's temper flares, her frustration boiling over at the smallest perceived slight. She rants at Angelica and the staff, her ego bruised by her own insecurities. Angelica stays calm, her hand subtly resting near the keys she's managed to smuggle away. She offers a sweet, placating smile, easily diffusing the Countess's misplaced anger. Lady Dosing eventually calms down, convinced once again of her own importance in the Empress's eyes. With a graceful wave, Angelica prepares for another day of convalescence, her staff bowing dutifully. The villa remains a peaceful sanctuary, far removed from the constant tension of the imperial court. Tea time is another opportunity for Angelica to play the part of the frail, appreciative guest. She rubs her temple, the mental strain of keeping up the act finally starting to take its toll. Lady Dosing is startled when Angelica suddenly leans in, offering a more personal gesture of friendship. Suzanne and the other maid remain in the background, their presence a quiet comfort in the midst of the schemes. Angelica reaches out to take the Countess's hand, cementing her influence over the woman. The bright sun and blooming flowers offer a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in Angelica's mind. She takes a moment to herself in the garden, looking back to ensure she isn't being watched. Lady Dosing catches up to her, her blue dress fluttering as she continues to babble about social prospects. The Countess lets out a joyful laugh, completely oblivious to the fact that she's being used. Angelica's expression falters for a split second, surprised by the sheer depth of the woman's vanity. She leans in close, whispering words of encouragement that she knows the Countess is desperate to hear. They walk together through the manicured grounds, a picture of two noblewomen enjoying a quiet afternoon. Once they're finally alone inside, Angelica slumps onto a sofa, the mask finally slipping. She is physically and mentally exhausted, her skin slick with a cold sweat from the effort of her performance. Her mind drifts to the original heroine, the woman Ranielo was truly meant for, standing amidst the ruins of the story. She lets out a long, weary sigh, wishing for just a moment of genuine peace, without the constant fear of death. The villa stands silent in the afternoon light, a beautiful prison where Angelica must continue her fight for survival. Angelica gazes into the distance, her mind heavy with the weight of her secret plans and the uncertain future. Ranielo rises abruptly from the table, his commanding presence drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. Inside a sturdy wooden chest, a simple purple cloak lies ready, a humble disguise for an empress. Angelica sits alone with her luggage, the reality of her impending departure finally sinking in. A comforting hand reaches out to hers, offering a silent promise of loyalty and support. Her maid speaks soft words of encouragement, trying to ease the visible tension in Angelica's eyes. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Angelica allows herself to be held, finding strength in her companion's embrace. She leans against her friend, closing her eyes for a brief moment of peace before the long journey begins. As night falls, the words of her confidant echo in her mind, recalling a memory of the hunting grounds. In the memory, Angelica sits mounted on her horse, looking back at her loyal staff under the moonlit sky. Sisan offers a sharp, knowing grin, confident that her mistress is ready for the secret excursion. Angelica smiles back, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement for the task at hand. Beside her, Ranielo sits tall on his own mount, his dark cloak billowing as he prepares to lead the way. Sisan and the other maid watch the pair depart into the shadows, their silence filled with unspoken prayers. The horse's hooves thunder against the forest floor as they gallop through the dense, dark woods. Ranielo's expression is stern and focused, his eyes fixed on the path as Angelica follows closely behind. Angelica pulls her hood closer, her anxiety mounting as the familiar gates of the hunting grounds come into view. They are met with the sight of heavily armed guards standing watch at the entrance to the restricted territory. One of the guards shouts a command, his voice harsh and demanding as he stops the unidentified riders. Without a word, Ranielo reaches into his cloak and produces a small, intricately carved wooden token. He presents the pass to the guard, his voice calm yet filled with an underlying authority that brooks no argument. Angelica sits frozen on her horse, her face pale with worry as the guard scrutinizes their passage. The guard's face twists into a greedy, malevolent grin as he grips the token, sensing he has the upper hand. Ranielo watches the man with a cold, predatory gaze, his eyes promising a swift and violent end to such insolence. Eden leads the way out of the gate, checking to make sure Angelica is right behind him. He gives her a silent nod as they clear the palace grounds. They ride out into the dark, the rhythm of the horse's hooves the only sound in the night. The sudden jolt of the horse catching its footing nearly unseats Angelica. As they gallop away from the capital, she looks up at the sky in disbelief. She lets out a long, shaky sigh, feeling the first real taste of freedom. By the time the sun rises, Eden warns her that they need to start conserving their energy. They take a brief moment to rest by some haystacks, staying hidden from the main road. Angelica looks at him, wondering how much longer they can keep this pace up. She asks him why they're stopping so soon when they're still so close. She's clearly anxious to put as much distance between them and the Emperor as possible. Night falls again, and the sky is filled with more stars than she's ever seen. They huddle around a small, crackling fire to ward off the deepening chill. A sudden rustle in the grass nearby makes Angelica flinch in terror. Before they can react, several masked bandits swarm their campsite. They're completely surrounded, with blades drawn and pointed straight at them. One of the men lunges forward, but a silver blur zooms past him. Angelica doesn't panic, pulling back her bow and lining up a shot. The arrow finds its mark, catching the bandit right in the center of his chest. Eden draws his sword and charges, moving to intercept the remaining attackers. He strikes with lethal efficiency, his blade cutting deep into the next man. He calls the bandit a bastard as he fights, while Angelica keeps her bow leveled at the others. The sudden violence leaves her heart racing. She stands in the field, her hair blowing in the wind as the last of the bandits fall. Noticing Eden took a hit during the fight, she quickly moves to bandage his arm. She taps the cloth down, making sure the wrap is secure enough to hold. Back at the estate, Marquess Henry Jacques is in a complete state of shock. He turns his fury towards Sylvia, whose face is white with fear. She trembles under his gaze, tears already starting to well up in her eyes. He delivers a sharp slap that knocks her to the ground. He turns away, barking orders at her to fix the mess she's made. Days pass, and the landscape turns into a frozen wasteland as they reach the mountains. The cold is brutal, but Eden keeps pushing forward without a word. They finally spot a small hut that looks like it was used for summer farming. Eden breaks the lock to get them inside, silently apologizing to the owner. He gets a fire going in the hearth, the logs crackling as they catch. Angelica huddles by the flames, trying to get some warmth back into her limbs. The sheer exhaustion of the trip causes her to suddenly slump over. Eden catches her, tilting her head up to see if she's still conscious. He holds her face gently, his expression softening as he looks at her. She stares back, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. Outside, the snowstorm is so thick they can't see the path ahead, even after 17 days on the run. Angelica and Eden struggle through the blinding snowstorm, barely able to keep their footing. A faint whisper catches her off guard, making her freeze in the middle of the blizzard. They keep pushing forward, their dark cloaks whipped around by the wind. Angelica is gasping for air, her legs finally giving out from exhaustion. Every breath is a struggle as the freezing air burns her lungs. Seeing she's reached her limit, Eden lifts her up to carry her the rest of the way. She tries to squirm in his arms, but her body is too weak to resist. Eden trudges through the deep snow, focused only on reaching their destination. They finally make it to the city of Tunya and head toward the temple. A priest looks on in shock as the bedraggled pair stumble into the sanctuary. Eden doesn't waste time, his stern gaze demanding immediate help for the Empress. They're led down a long, carpeted hall as the weight of the journey finally takes its toll. Angelica's eyes are heavy with worry as her strength fades. She slumps over completely, falling into a dead faint. The Grand Temple stands tall against the mountains, a temporary refuge for the fugitives. When she wakes up, Angelica finds herself in a soft bed, her mind still in a blur. A woman with long dark hair and elegant white and purple robes enters the room with a tray of food. She leans in close, her distant eyes studying Angelica with an intense focus. Angelica stares back at the stranger, unsure of what to make of her. She realizes this woman must be the fated partner from the original story. This is Serafina, the renowned saintess of Tunya. The two women sit in silence as the air grows thick with unspoken questions. Angelica steals a glance at her, trying to figure out if she's a friend or a foe. Serafina realizes she hasn't even introduced herself yet. She gives a slight nod and formally says her name is Serafina. A gentle smile crosses her face, though it doesn't quite reach her eyes. Angelica feels a sudden wave of unease as the saintess's expression turns grave. Serafina drops a bombshell, warning her that the Emperor will be arriving here very soon. Panic sets in immediately. Angelica thought they had finally escaped him. Serafina leans in close, her voice low as she delivers the chilling warning. She places a comforting hand on Angelica's shoulder to try and steady her. Angelica fidgets with the blankets, her mind racing for a new plan to hide. The room falls silent as they both contemplate the Emperor's arrival. Angelica produces a book titled The Flower That Blooms Even in the Abyss. Serafina takes the book, her face unreadable as she looks at the cover. They look through the pages together, hoping to find a way to change their fate. A dark vision flickers through Angelica's mind, showing a hand reaching through a frame. She sees a knight falling through a void, a sign that the story is breaking apart. Night settles over the temple as the full moon hangs ominously in the sky. A voice calls out, "Your Majesty," and Angelica freezes in absolute shock. She cowers on the floor as a tall figure stands in the doorway. Ranielo has officially arrived at the temple, and he's brought an army with him. Ranielo Actilus stares out with a cold, predatory gaze, his red eyes glowing with an intensity that promises no mercy. Angelica Actilus is struck by a wave of pure terror, her hand flying to her mouth as she hides from his sight. Eden looks on with a grim expression, his jaw set as he prepares for the fallout of their failed flight. From her vantage point, Serafina watches through a floor grate as Eden is sternly told he will be put on probation for his role in the escape. She watches with a heavy heart, the guilt of her own situation reflected in her wide, purple eyes. She wonders why they would risk so much to see her, a question that lingers painfully in her mind. Serafina takes a moment to steady herself, her resolve hardening despite the fear that threatens to overwhelm her. Outside, the sun glints off the icy branches, a beautiful and indifferent witness to the turmoil within the temple. Angelica sits up in her ornate bed, the grand surroundings of the Tunya temple feeling more like a cage than a sanctuary. She looks down at the sheets, her mind racing with thoughts of the Emperor's arrival and what it means for their future. A heavy sigh escapes her as the weight of her choices and the safety of her companions weigh on her soul. She knows Ranielo is searching for her, and the thought of being found by him is more terrifying than any death. Chibi Angelica trembles under the covers, her small frame shaking with the uncontrollable fear of a cornered animal. She clings to the hope that if Serafina can succeed, they might still find a way to run away and be free. The distant clamor and murmuring voices from the temple halls only amplify her growing sense of dread. Her eyes snap open in shock as a sudden, terrifying realization takes hold of her mind. Her hands tremble violently as the reality of their precarious situation hits her with renewed force. She gasps, her expression one of pure alarm as she looks up at the empty room. She remembers that Eden was supposed to be guarding her door, and his absence now feels like an omen. She steps out into the corridor, the clicking of her shoes on the stone floor the only sound in the oppressive silence. Serafina appears, her face pale and her expression filled with a shock that mirrors Angelica's own. The saintess is clearly panicked, her hands fluttering to her throat as she struggles to find her voice. She urgently talks to Angelica, her words hurried as she tries to explain the latest danger they face. Angelica stands frozen as she catches sight of a tall figure in the distance, her heart hammering in her chest. Suddenly, Angelica collapses to her knees, clutching her head as a surge of blue energy pulses around her. Serafina watches in a state of trembling shock, unable to do anything but witness the Empress's pain. Angelica groans in agony, the world around her turning into a blur of dark red and crushing pressure. With a jolt of alarm, Serafina rushes forward to help the fallen woman, her long hair billowing behind her. She pulls Angelica close, her voice steady and desperate as she tells her everything will be all right. Serafina looks up, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance as she addresses an unspoken threat. Angelica looks on in a daze, her mind still clouded by the sudden and violent vision she experienced. A sharp clack echoes through the hall as someone approaches her room, breaking the tense silence. Eden appears at the doorway, his face etched with a concern that cuts through his usual stoic mask. Tears begin to fall from Angelica's eyes, the dam finally breaking as she faces her loyal protector. Eden moves to the bed and leans over her, his presence offering a brief moment of comfort in the chaos. He looks at her with an intensity that speaks of a loyalty far deeper than duty alone. Angelica lets out a silent, heartbroken cry, her face flushed with the effort of holding back her sobs. She collapses against him, her body racking with sobs as she seeks refuge in his familiar embrace. The tears flow freely now, washing away the last of her composure as she mourns the loss of her brief freedom. Eden grabs her arm, his expression stern yet worried as he tries to get her to listen to his warning. They stand together in the quiet room, a small island of shared history in a world that wants them apart. Serafina enters the room with a look of determination, ready to help them face whatever comes next. Serafina holds Angelica Actilus close, gently patting her back to soothe her frantic heart. A dark, unsettling energy seems to ripple through the room as Serafina senses a shift in the air, while Eden stands guard nearby. Angelica's hand grips Serafina's arm tightly, her voice a desperate whisper as she calls out to her friend. Together, Angelica and Eden look out with a mixture of fear and determination, knowing that the confrontation they've feared is at hand. The sky above is a brilliant, mocking blue, clear and bright despite the cold dread settling over the temple. A memory of Ranielo Actilus's voice filters through Angelica's mind, a soft mumble of her nickname that sends shivers down her spine. On the snow-covered grounds, the Emperor gallops forward on his massive black steed, a force of nature fueled by obsession. A wide, chilling smile spreads across Ranielo's face as he relishes the thought of finally being reunited with his runaway wife. In his mind, he sees Sylvia Jacques, imagining her initial shock turning into a quiet submission to his will. He recalls moments of holding Sylvia, his thoughts clouded by his displeasure at being kept from the battlefield. His focus shifts entirely to Angelica, his plan to find entertainment in her presence clear in his cold eyes. With a powerful neigh, his horse rears up, marking the Emperor's arrival at the very gates of the sanctuary. Inside the temple, the servants fall to their knees, trembling with terror as they face the fury of their monarch. Ranielo looks down at them with utter contempt, his red eyes burning with a demand for answers. Two hooded figures are brought before him, bound and forced to kneel as he's told they were with the Empress when she vanished. He leans over them menacingly, the weight of his dark presence enough to crush the spirit of any who dare to cross him. A young maid watches from the shadows, her face pale with horror as she witnesses the Emperor's ruthless interrogation. One of the captives, a figure with long silver hair, keeps their head bowed in a silence that only provokes Ranielo further. A glowing eye peers out from beneath the hood, a final spark of defiance in the face of certain doom. With a swift motion, Ranielo points his sword at the silver-haired captive's throat, his voice a cold command for silence. He speaks of what his wife needs, his obsession twisted into a dark and dangerous path that leaves no room for mercy. The silver-haired figure looks up and smiles, a haunting expression that doesn't falter even as the blade is pressed against them. As the captive falls in a pool of blood, Ranielo turns away, his final command a cruel frame-up, "Tell her that you killed Sylvia Jacques." Against a backdrop of beautiful, blooming flowers, the words "I love you" appear, a stark and twisted contrast to the violence just committed. Angelica wakes up with a start, the words from her dreams still echoing in the dark. How could he possibly know her real name? The Emperor's voice felt so real, claiming she didn't truly know him. The memory of his gaze makes her skin crawl. She gasps for air, clutching her throat as if his hands were still there. Every shadow in the room feels like him. Meanwhile, at the temple, Serafina delivers a chilling prophecy. She claims that even the most cunning tongue won't save them this time. Eden collapses, the weight of his failure hitting him all at once. Every plan he made has been dismantled before it even began. The Holy Knights remain unmoved by his plea. To them, anyone who dares to insult the Emperor deserves nothing but a cold death. Angelica can't shake the feeling of dread that's been following her since she was brought back. It's like she's drowning in his obsession. She wants to escape this nightmare, but the deeper she sinks, the more impossible it feels to find a way out. The history of this empire is built on blood and extortion. Ranielo is just the latest monster to sit on the throne. He looks at her with a predatory smile, confident that she can't hide from him forever. He's already waiting for her next move. Eden is left to watch as the people he tried to lead are bound and dragged away. He's lost everything. Serafina and the others can only watch the carnage with a grim sense of duty. They knew this was how it would end. Ranielo is practically beaming, enjoying the thrill of the hunt now that his favorite prey is back in his reach. The sight of his twisted satisfaction is enough to make anyone sick. He truly is a beast in human skin. A few days pass in a blur of forced politeness and growing paranoia. The palace feels more like a tomb than ever. Angelica sits alone, her mind drifting to the people she left behind. She wonders if they're even still alive. A sudden sound at the door breaks her concentration. She looks up, her heart skipping a beat. It's Eden and Susan. For a moment, she thinks she's finally being rescued. Eden looks at her with such intensity, his eyes searching hers for any sign of the woman he once knew. They sit with her, their presence a small island of comfort in the sea of her misery. But the tension between them is thick. Outside, the rain pours down on the palace, a cold reminder of the world beyond these walls. Angelica is led to the chapel, where she's told to pray. The air is heavy with the scent of incense and old secrets. As she folds her hands, she feels a strange surge of energy. It's like her connection to the saintess is actually physically growing. The sensation is so intense, she wonders if she's slipped back into a dream. The world around her starts to blur. Suddenly, she's shoved back by an invisible force. The peaceful chapel is replaced by a vision of violence. She sees Serafina being seized, the saintess's face twisted in a silent scream as she's dragged away. The vision is visceral, the desperation of the past bleeding into her own mind. She can almost hear the name being whispered. A dark-haired woman stares back at her with glowing red eyes, promising that she's finally on her way. Angelica jolts awake again, the transition back to reality leaving her dizzy and disoriented. Her maid gasps, clearly startled by her mistress's sudden and violent awakening. The fear in the room is mutual. The storm outside has only worsened, thunder rattling the windows as the moon disappears behind the clouds. Driven by a compulsion she can't explain, Angelica returns to the shrine. The silence there is deafening. She's huffing, her body struggling to keep up with the frantic pace of her racing heart. Someone is watching her. A low hum fills the air as a ghostly light begins to emanate from the statue of the deity. The divine presence is undeniable. Her maid covers her mouth, frozen in place as the supernatural power washes over the room. She's never seen anything like this. Angelica stands in the center of the glow, her form becoming translucent as the vision takes hold once more. She looks into the heart of the light, witnessing the moment everything went wrong in the original timeline. A sword shatters with a deafening crack, and the eyes of a monster glare from the shadows. Ranielo was always destined to destroy. The mental strain is agonizing. She clutches her head, her mind nearly breaking under the weight of the revelation. Her companion staggers back, unable to process the divine event unfolding before her eyes. It's too much for any mortal to bear. Everything zooms in on the truth, the price that was paid, and the predator that was unleashed. She sees it all now. Ranielo is out there, riding through the dark, and he won't stop until he's reclaimed every piece of his world, starting with her. Ranielo is on a warpath, his eyes burning with a cold, relentless light as he rides through the night. He's not just hunting a runaway empress, he's reclaiming a possession he's decided is essential. To see how she ended up back in this nightmare, we have to look back a few days to the moment it all went wrong. The escape was supposed to be her freedom, but instead it led her straight into a trap. Ranielo eventually caught up, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. Why didn't she take you with her? He loomed over her, his presence suffocating any hope of another flight. The sheer weight of his aura was enough to make her heart stutter. He grabbed her, his touch possessive and cold, leaving her trembling in fear. She was helpless in his grasp, a small bird caught in the talons of a hawk. As his grip tightened, Angelica felt her strength draining away. She gasped for air, the world spinning as her consciousness began to slip. Everything went white as she finally succumbed to the darkness. When she finally woke up, The reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. Ranielo was right there. Ranielo stood over her, his obsession having reached a fever pitch. All she could feel was soul-crushing fear. Back in the present, the palace walls feel like they're closing in on her. She remembers the desperate plan she made with Eden before they were caught. Eden was falling apart, his frustration boiling over as he realized how rigged the world was against them. He couldn't stand the thought of her returning to that monster, but they were running out of time. He cursed the gods and the fate that had brought them to this wretched world. Angelica watched him, her mind already made up about the risk she had to take. She knew that as long as they were running, they were losing. They had to change the game. She sat in the silence of her room, preparing herself for the role she had to play. The lone rider from her vision is a sign that the pieces are finally moving. The end is coming, and she can only hope her gamble pays off. "We have to do this," she told Eden, her voice steady despite her fear. He looked at her, his expression a mix of pain and admiration for her resolve. "I'll lure him in," she said. It was the only way to get close enough to strike. A few hours ago, Ranielo was meeting with his advisors in the Grand Hall. He smirked at their petty concerns, his mind only on the toy he had successfully recovered. The clerics bowed low, their fear of the Emperor outweighing their devotion to the gods. They could sense the darkness radiating from him, a storm that threatened to consume the entire empire. Now, at the shrine, Angelica stares at the statue of the Saintess, seeking some kind of guidance. The stone figure seems to watch her, its eyes filled with a silent, ancient sorrow. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness hits her, and she slumps to the floor. A voice whispers in her ear, speaking of the agent of Actila and the price of blood. Her eyes glow with an eerie light as she's pulled into a vision of the past. She sees Serafina, the former Saintess, looking like a ghost of her former self. A heavy door slams shut, signaling the beginning of the end for the previous world. A dark, armored hand reaches out, grabbing Serafina by the hair. The vision shows the brutal reality of the original timeline's collapse. Someone is being grabbed. People were slaughtered in the halls, and the temple was turned into a house of death. Everyone was running for their lives. And there stood the original Ranielo, a monster with a bow, surveying the wreckage of everything he'd destroyed. The temple priests look on in stunned silence, their prayers offering no protection against the monster at their gates. Ranielo doesn't see them. His gaze is fixed on the top of the stairs, where his runaway empress stands. Or, if any harm has come to her, he thinks. But Angelica isn't just seeing him, she's seeing a vision of the past, of Serafina being dragged through the dirt. "Saintess!" the onlookers cry out. The Saintess's eyes are hollow, a silent testament to the horrors she's already witnessed at the Emperor's hands. In that previous world, there was no hope, only a cold, endless pursuit across a frozen landscape. He was determined to reclaim her. She had fallen to her knees then, just as Angelica feels like doing now, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. "Wait," she whispered. The vision is a warning. Ranielo is a force of nature that cannot be stopped, only delayed. They move through the trees like ghosts. Back in the present or a memory she's reliving, Angelica stands her ground at the shrine. "Angie!" a voice calls out. He's here to take her back. He's decided the game of cat and mouse is over, and it's time for the prize to return to its cage. She watches him from the top of the steps, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The temple steps loom between them. Ranielo smirks, his red eyes glowing with a dark amusement. He loves it when she tries to fight back. She draws her bow, her fingers white-knuckled as she aims for the man who claims to love her. She can't miss. "Now," he says, his voice a cold blade that cuts through the tension of the standoff. He's ready for her move. The temple grounds become a battlefield. Two people, one obsession, and a final, desperate stand. Her hands are trembling so much she can barely keep the arrow notched. The fear is a physical weight that she can't shake. Ranielo aims his own bow with terrifying calm. He's not afraid of her. He's fascinated by her defiance. A sudden, sharp sound. A strike from the shadows that neither of them expected. The tension finally snaps with a stab. For a split second, Angelica wants to just let go. She wants to kneel, to beg for his mercy, to be safe in his arms again. "I want to kneel and beg right now," she thinks. She remembers the kisses, the way he looked at her when he thought she was truly his. "I want to say that I was wrong, that I love him," she admits to herself. But then she remembers the terror. She won't go back. She refuses to be his toy, even if she has to kill him herself. Tears stream down her face as she prepares to pull the trigger. She has to end this, one way or another, for her own sake. A rustle in the nearby brush. Someone is moving, a silent shadow closing in on the Emperor. The moment is here. She squeezes her eyes shut, unable to watch as the world they know begins to crumble around them. The bowstring snaps forward, a desperate shot, a final cry for a freedom she's never truly known. It's now or never. Suddenly, a blade flashes, a hidden strike aimed straight for the heart of the monster. The time for games is over. Serafina's ghost-like figure watches from the edge of the vision, her hands over her mouth in a silent scream of horror. Ranielo gasps as the cold steel bites into his flesh, his expression one of genuine shock. "Urgh," he groans. A splash of blood, or perhaps a manifestation of his dark blessing, erupts from the wound. The untouchable has been touched. The Emperor of Actilus falls to his knees with a heavy thud, his power finally failing him as Eden stands triumphant. Angelica collapses onto the stairs, her breath coming in ragged, painful gulps. She can't believe they actually did it. "Huff," she gasps. She sits there, staring at her hands, unable to process the fact that they actually managed to hurt him. "Urgh," she moans. Every gasp for air is a reminder that she's still alive, that the nightmare might finally be ending. Gasp, she breathes. Angelica. Eden's voice is a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of total collapse. She can only pant in response. He looks just as battered as she feels, his clothes torn and his expression weary but triumphant. "Eden," she whispers. He reaches out, his hand steadying her as she struggles to find her footing in the aftermath of the battle. They lean on each other, two broken people staggering away from the site of their greatest victory. Stagger, they go. Behind them, Ranielo remains slumped on the ground, a dark, silent shadow in the moonlight, defeated for now. The trail of blood on the temple steps is the price of their escape, a debt paid in violence. It's a long way down. They limp away, the halls of the temple finally offering them a path to a world without him. They don't look back. Eden doesn't let go, his grip a constant reminder that she isn't alone in this fight. He's her anchor. They talk in hushed, hurried whispers, planning their next move before the rest of the world catches up with them. As she looks toward the horizon, Angelica feels a wave of relief. She thinks she's finally safe. She thinks she's going home. Eden and Angelica stand at the entrance of the temple hall, their shadows stretching long across the cold floor. They believe they've found a way out, but the air is thick with a new kind of dread. Eden keeps a protective arm around her, his face a mask of grim determination as they seek their final sanctuary within the temple. They are weary, but they can't afford to stop now. They reach a mysterious, heavy door. Is it really here? Angelica wonders, watching a strange, magical light begin to swirl around the handle. This is the moment of truth. "I'll open it," Eden declares, reaching for the heavy iron ring as the air around them begins to shimmer with an otherworldly power. He's determined to protect her, no matter what. They stand before the final threshold, the silence of the temple feeling more like a trap than a refuge. The weight of their journey rests on what lies behind this door. As the door opens, the hope they carried is instantly extinguished by the sight that greets them inside. The relief they felt moments ago was a cruel illusion. Eden staggers back, the reality of their situation hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The sanctuary they sought is gone, replaced by a nightmare. He sinks to his knees, his hands buried in his hair. "Damn it," he whispers, broken by the futility of their struggle and the sheer scale of their defeat. His eyes are wide, reflecting a deep, soul-crushing horror as he realizes the true nature of their enemy. There was never any escape, only the illusion of it. Angelica's face is a portrait of pure terror. The realization that they were merely dancing to Ranielo's tune the entire time is finally sinking in, chilling her to the bone. At the far end of the hall, the great doors groan open, flooding the space with an ominous, blood-red light that signals the end of their brief reprieve. Eden looks back, his expression one of weary, bitter resignation. He knows that light, and he knows the monster who brings it with him wherever he goes. Framed by the crimson glow, a silhouette appears with a long screech. Ranielo stands in the doorway with his sword drawn, a silent, lethal predator watching his cornered prey. He begins to trudge forward, his slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the empty hall. Eden moves to block him, shielding Angelica with his own body one last time. Step by agonizing step, the Emperor approaches. The air itself seems to freeze in his presence, suffocating any lingering spark of hope they might have had. Suddenly, Angelica's vision is consumed by a blinding light, a glimpse into the very fabric of time and fate. She's seeing something she was never meant to witness. She sees a memory of a different world, a scene of carnage, where a man with a sword stands over the broken bodies of those she cared for. "Ah!" she gasps. Driven by a sudden, desperate impulse to protect what's left, Angelica lunges forward, her arms wide as if to break the cycle of violence before it can claim another victim. Eden can only watch in shock, his own strength failing as he sees her throw herself into the path of danger. Her courage is as heartbreaking as it is futile. A cold, sharp blade is instantly at her throat. Huff! She can feel the cold steel against her skin and the even colder breath of the man who has finally reclaimed her. Through the darkness, Ranielo's red eye burns with a terrifying, obsessive light. He has her back in his grasp, and this time, he won't let any power in heaven or earth take her away. The vision ends with the haunting voice of the original saintess, Seraphina, speaking from the depths of her eternal regret. "He did this to me." Angelica looks back on the absolute terror she's endured at Ranielo's hands, but she realizes that things have taken an even darker turn. Ranielo stands tall, his sword leveled directly at Eden. He looms over them, his aura thick with a murderous intent. Angelica is frozen, her body trembling uncontrollably as she realizes there's no escape. The heavy sword clatters onto the stone floor. Ranielo admits he's lost his grip on reality, his eyes reflecting a shattered mind. He suddenly lets out a guttural, agonized scream. With a violent shove, they're all sent tumbling to the ground. Ranielo slams Eden into the floor with overwhelming force. He starts raining down brutal blows on the defenseless knight. Angelica watches in pure horror as the stone floor beneath them cracks. She cries out, her voice barely a whisper in the chaos. The sound of the beating is sickening, echoing through the empty hall. Ranielo doesn't stop, his movements driven by a primal, divine rage. She begs him to stop, reaching out with shaking hands. Blood is already splattered across her fingers. Finally, the Emperor pauses, his breathing heavy and ragged. Angelica slumps over, realizing she's made a terrible mistake in judging his limits. Ranielo looks down at her, his face smeared with blood. She stares up at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. He points out the obvious: she doesn't actually want to see Eden die. His gaze is hollow, almost as if he's mourning his own nature. He forces her to look at the destruction he's wrought. Her hands continue to tremble as they hover near his bloodied face. They sit together in the wreckage, a predator and his prey in a twisted embrace. She searches his eyes for a trace of anything human, but finds only darkness. The room falls silent, leaving only the sound of their labored breathing. Eden lies nearby, his breath coming in shallow pants. Angelica realizes with a start that the knight is somehow still alive. Ranielo pulls her closer, his obsession tightening like a noose. A figure watches them from the shadows between the bookshelves. Seraphina stares on, knowing she holds the only power that can stop the carnage. Angelica is trapped against him, her fate tied to his erratic moods. They stay locked in a dark, silent embrace on the library floor. He offers a twisted word of congratulations, as if they've won something. He finally pulls away, trudging toward the exit without another word. Angelica is left behind, staring at the floor in a state of shock. He suddenly stops and turns back toward her. In one smooth motion, he lifts her off her feet. She lets out a sharp gasp as she's hauled into his arms. He carries her away from the scene, leaving the broken knight in the dark. Angelica wonders if she's destined to die slowly, just like Seraphina did in the original story. She can only watch as the hallways blur past, her mind filled with the image of the former saintess. Ranielo strides forward without a word, leaving the library and a hidden witness behind. Seraphina watches them go from the shadows before dashing off in the opposite direction. The Emperor carries his prize through the long, quiet corridors of the palace. Back in the darkness of the library, Seraphina returns to the man they left behind. She drops to the floor beside the wounded knight, desperately calling out his name. Her eyes well up with tears as she sees just how much blood he's lost. Angelica remains silent, her own dread reflected in the dim light. Under the cold glow of the moon, she begs Ranielo to finally put her down. He ignores her, his grip tightening as he carries her up the grand staircase. Angelica's thoughts drift back to the day Seraphina offered her a meal in a rare moment of kindness. The saintess had looked at her with such a gentle, knowing expression, but that compassion felt like it was masking a much deeper, more tragic secret. She thinks of the forbidden book and the roses, symbols of a love that was doomed from the start. Back in the present, Serafina realizes she's been living a lie this entire time. She feels as though she's standing on the edge of a void, with no way to turn back. She remembers Serafina's sad smile, realizing they were both victims of the same cruel fate. The weight of the situation is almost too much for Angelica to bear. The morning sun begins to peek over the distant, snow-capped mountains. High above the palace grounds, the world looks cold and unforgiving. Ranielo keeps her pinned to his side as the light of a new day breaks. One of the elders cries out, his voice filled with desperation as he witnesses the Emperor's actions. Ranielo remains stoic, his eyes fixed on some distant, dark goal. They arrive at the entrance to a secluded part of the palace. With a violent slam, he kicks the bedroom door open, ignoring her frantic protests. He drops her onto the bed, his presence looming over her like a dark cloud. Angelica reaches out, her hand trembling as she tries to push him away. Her mind is still with Eden, terrified that help won't reach him in time. Serafina weeps as she realizes the knight's condition is beyond her current power. Angelica looks away, unable to face the man who has once again trapped her. A servant is sent scurrying out of the room, terrified of the Emperor's unpredictable mood. She can feel his intense gaze burning into her, demanding her attention. Ranielo leans in, his face inches from hers as the air between them turns cold. The tension is suffocating, and for a moment, neither of them moves. She flinches as he reaches for her foot, his touch unexpectedly deliberate. He stares at her, his expression a confusing mix of obsession and something that looks like pain. Suddenly, his face contorts, and he looks away as if struck by a phantom blow. Angelica lets out a cry of pain as the bed shifts beneath them. She stares at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, her confusion mounting. She flops back onto the bed as he suddenly loses his footing. Ranielo groans in agony, the divine punishment beginning to manifest as he tries to care for her. Angelica lies on the bed, her heart racing as she watches Ranielo with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. He sits heavily on the edge of the mattress, a pained groan escaping his lips as the divine punishment takes hold. Despite his own agony, he reaches out for her, his movements stiff and forced by his own dark obsession. He leans in close, his shadow enveloping her in a suffocating embrace that leaves her breathless. She grips the bedsheets tight, her knuckles white as she prepares herself for whatever he might do next. He pulls her closer, his possessive grip tightening as he refuses to let her go even for a second. Surrounded by a dark floral aura, he looks at her with an intensity that borders on pure madness. The bright light from the window offers a stark, jarring contrast to the darkness brewing within the room. He pulls her into his lap, treating her like a fragile doll he's claimed and won in some terrible game. She remains motionless, her eyes downcast as she endures his touch, hoping to survive this encounter. He speaks of punishment and forgiveness, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that chills her to the bone. He presses a cold kiss to her hair, a gesture that feels more like a claim of ownership than a comfort. "Tell me," he demands, his obsession driving him to know every secret thought hidden in her head. Leaving her behind, Ranielo strides through the palace corridors with a grim and relentless purpose. He finds a priest out on the terrace, a figure of religious authority dressed in ornate white and gold robes. Without a word, he clamps a powerful hand onto the man's shoulder, startling him. "Heal my wife," he commands, his voice cold and leaving no room for argument or hesitation. He watches the priest hurry off to do his bidding, his gaze remain cold and unforgiving. Even as he secures help for Angelica, his own internal torment remains etched onto his face. He stands alone on the balcony, looking out over his vast empire with a heart heavy with dark thoughts. The physical toll of the divine punishment is starting to show, manifesting as a tightening in his neck. He grips his own throat, gasping for air as a sudden surge of pain threatens to overwhelm him. A silent scream of pure agony rips through him as he struggles to maintain his crumbling composure. His thoughts drift back to the knight who dared to interfere Eden. Down below, he sees Eden's broken body being carried through the palace courtyard by several men. The guards bring the wounded knight inside, followed closely by a worried and frantic Serafina. Ranielo staggers back, his head throbbing with the weight of his own dark and bloody memories. Eden is a bloody mess, gasping for breath as he's dragged before the cold-eyed emperor. Ranielo looks down at the broken man, any trace of mercy replaced by a cold, calculating rage. Even in his broken and battered state, Eden manages to let out a bloody, defiant chuckle. The Emperor's eyes glow with a lethal red light, his patience finally snapping under the strain. The group turns in shock as Ranielo suddenly lunges forward, his intent clear and deadly. In a flash, his hand is clamped firmly around Eden's throat, instantly cutting off his laughter. He squeezes with all his might, his fingers digging into the knight's neck as he vents his frustration. "Sire!" Serafina cries out, her voice filled with a desperate, hopeless terror for her friend. Eden gasps for air, his face contorting as he stares into the dark, bottomless abyss of Ranielo's eyes. A haunting vision of a woman with long, white hair flashes before Ranielo's eyes, her voice echoing in his mind. The phantom woman laughs manically, her green eyes wide with a madness that mirrors his own internal chaos. "I told you," she seems to whisper, her presence a chilling reminder of a past he cannot escape. Driven by the haunting vision, Ranielo smiles a terrifying, joyless smile as he chokes the life out of Eden. With a sudden violent motion, he throws the knight's limp body to the cold stone floor with a thud. Serafina and the others can only watch in horror as Eden crumples, silent and motionless. Ranielo staggers away from the scene of his latest atrocity, his body trembling under the weight of the divine punishment. Within the quiet room, a single candelabra flickers, casting long, wavering shadows against the walls. Angelica remains tucked under the blankets, her feet peeking out as she sleeps through the aftermath of the violence. She looks peaceful for the first time in days, her features softened by the temporary sanctuary of sleep. A hazy, dreamlike image of Serafina drifts through her mind, a ghostly figure from a life she can barely recall. She wakes with a start, her eyes widening as the harsh reality of her situation comes rushing back. The room is quiet, but the air feels thick with an unspoken dread that she can no longer ignore. Hot tears trail down her cheeks as she reflects on her helplessness and the monster she is forced to call husband. Serafina is there when she opens her eyes, sitting faithfully at her side like a silent guardian. Memories of Ranielo's rare moments of kindness flicker in her mind, and she realizes she must erase them all to survive. She watches with curiosity as Serafina stands and begins searching through a nearby cabinet. With a sharp clack, Serafina pulls out a small, ornate chest, her movements purposeful and grim. She holds the box with a somber expression, her eyes reflecting a secret that has been kept for far too long. She raises a dark, leather-bound book from the chest, prompting a confused, "A book?" from Angelica. The Empress takes it and begins to flip through the pages, her eyes scanning the ancient text with growing alarm. A bead of sweat rolls down her temple as she begins to understand the significance of the words before her. "That's right," Serafina confirms softly, watching as the terrifying truth begins to take shape in Angelica's mind. The Saintess looks on with a sad, knowing expression, her own burden finally being shared with another. Angelica's breath comes in short, ragged gasps as the full weight of the revelation finally sinks in. They sit together in the dim light, the secret contained within the book, threatening to change the course of their lives. Serafina waits patiently for Angelica to find her voice, her calm demeanor belying the gravity of the situation. The revelation of why she no longer has the power to kill the Emperor hits her with the force of a physical blow. Her hands tremble as she clutches the book, the pages crinkling under the pressure of her frantic grip. Her eyes widen in a moment of pure, unadulterated shock as she stares into the abyss of her own uncertain future. Angelica sits up in bed, looking like she hasn't slept in days. Suzanne is sitting right there, keeping watch. The maid looks down, clearly upset about something she's about to say. She starts explaining a prophecy that changes everything, while Angelica tries to take it all in. We get a glimpse of Serafina, the former Saintess, and the divine message she left behind. To stop the Emperor's path of destruction, a massive price had to be paid to reset time. That price was the total destruction of the soul of the person she loved most. Back in the bedroom, the weight of that truth hangs heavy in the air. Angelica holds the book tight, her expression shifting as the reality of her situation sinks in. She's realizing that the world itself might be rigged against any plan they make. Suddenly, she looks up, sensing someone approaching. The door is thrown open, and Ranielo stalks into the room, looking as imposing as ever. Suzanne flinches, her face pale with shock at his sudden appearance. The Emperor stands tall, his shadow stretching across the room while the maid bows in fear. Angelica stays in bed, watching him closely as he approaches. He stands at the foot of the bed, completely ignoring the maid as he focuses on his wife. He stares at her with a look that's a mix of hunger and something far darker. He sits right on the edge of the bed, making Angelica instinctively pull back. Instead of his usual cruelty, he just leans in and rests his forehead against her. He collapses into her lap, catching her completely off guard with his sudden weakness. For a moment, the most dangerous man in the Empire is just lying there, quiet. Angelica's eyes go wide. This is the last thing she expected from him. He stays there, his head resting heavy on her as if he's trying to find some peace. He reaches up and gently brushes his fingers against her hair. He nudges his face against her, acting more like a needy predator than a killer. Angelica flinches at the touch, her survival instincts screaming at her to run. But Ranielo doesn't let go. He pulls her closer, his obsession only growing. He's becoming fixated on the idea of her staying by his side forever, no matter what. Suddenly, a loud thud echoes through the quiet room. A cup of water sits on the nightstand, but the tension in the room is about to break everything. The glass hits the floor and shatters into 1,000 tiny pieces. Among the wreckage, a voice whispers that she's the one he can't let go of. Ranielo suddenly falls to the ground, gasping for air as blood starts to stream from his eyes. Angelica grabs a sharp shard of glass, looking down at the Emperor while he's vulnerable. He's in agony, his divine blessing turning into a physical curse right before her eyes. Tears stream down her face as she holds the weapon, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She's hovering over him on the bed, caught in a moment where she could end it all right now. She grips the shard so hard that her own blood starts dripping onto his shirt. Ranielo doesn't fight back. He just grabs her wrist and pulls her hand closer to his chest. He looks like he's inviting the pain, his eyes fixed on hers through the blood. He suddenly grabs her and pulls her down onto the bed with him. They're face to face now, the air thick with blood and the smell of iron. He looks at her with a terrifyingly calm expression and simply says, "Two." Back at the palace, the gilded cage felt more like a prison than ever. The staff greeted her with the usual stiff bows, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Life returned to a dull routine of prepared baths and silent service. The maids were polite enough, but they were just reminders of her captivity. Even with her eyes open, she was haunted by visions of what she'd lost. She spent her evenings staring at the sunset, wondering if she'd ever be free. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that room, holding a shard to his throat. He'd just laugh and grab her hand, welcoming the violence as if it were a game. She was trapped in a cycle of failed plans and crushing reality. She'd tried everything, even picking up a sword to end him herself. But every strike was met with a heavy clang and that same mocking smile. As her assassination attempts continued to fail, she realized he was almost untouchable. She even tried a bow, hoping distance would give her the advantage. But he always ended up right back in her personal space. He caught every blow and every attempt with terrifying ease. It didn't matter how hard she fought him off. He treated her hatred like it was just another form of affection. They were locked in a dance of death that she was destined to lose. He'd always looked down on her from above, making her feel small and powerless. Now, his touch was a constant, suffocating weight. He pinned her down, physically and mentally, until she had nowhere left to turn. Every forced closeness was a reminder of his absolute control over her. She thought back to the sanctuary, a place that was supposed to be a refuge. Instead, it was just another stage for her failure. She felt like she was being torn apart, limb from limb, by his obsession. Nights were the worst, lying alone in a room that didn't feel like hers. She watched the days go by through the window, losing track of time. Ranielo wouldn't even let her have the floor. He'd find her wherever she tried to hide. She could feel his heart beating, a steady, terrifying rhythm against her. She wanted to scream, but the words just wouldn't come out. She looked at him, searching for even a hint of the monster she knew he was. She wondered if he'd ever release his grip on her, or if she was stuck here forever. She thought about Eden, the man who had risked everything to help her escape. In the end, she had been forced into a carriage and dragged back to the capital. She obviously had no choice but to leave Eden behind, wounded and alone. The guilt was a heavy weight that she carried every single day. One by one, everyone who tried to help her had vanished. Not one of them remained by her side. A sudden creak from the door broke the heavy silence of the evening. It was him again, standing in the doorway like he'd never left. He asked if he was somewhere he shouldn't be, his voice dripping with mock politeness. Angelica sat up, her heart racing as she tried to pull herself together. She couldn't help but flinch as he walked toward her, the predator closing in for another visit. Angelica flinched as Ranielo loomed over her, his presence suffocating the very air in the room. He stared at her with those cold, crimson eyes, his expression unreadable but intensely predatory. His breath was heavy and ragged, as if he were struggling to contain a great internal monster. Every detail of his focused gaze felt like a blade pressed dangerously against her skin. He suddenly grabbed her arm, and a violent, instinctive shudder went through her entire body. His hand moved up to her face, a touch that was both intimate and utterly terrifying. "Let's end this," he muttered, his hands moving toward her neck as if to settle a final debt. Angelica stared back in silence, her breath hitching in her chest as absolute fear paralyzed her. The air in the room felt thick and charged, crackling with a strange and dangerous energy. He leaned in closer, his weight pinning her down as she struggled to pull away from him. She squeezed her eyes shut, terrified of the final blow she was certain was about to fall. But then, Ranielo's gaze sharpened, his eyes widening in a sudden, sharp burst of agony. He pulled back abruptly, his hands trembling as if he'd been struck by an unseen force. He staggered across the room, knocking things aside in a desperate attempt to stay upright. Angelica collapsed against the furniture, coughing and gasping for the air that had been denied her. She looked up to see him clutching his chest, a look of genuine confusion and pain on his face. Eerie red chains began to manifest around his hands, binding him with a mysterious, magical force. The glowing restraints tightened, pulling his arms down as he let out a low groan of agony. He was being dragged to the floor by the weight of these invisible, spectral shackles. Angelica watched, her hand at her bruised throat, unable to process the bizarre sight before her. She saw the power that had always terrified her, now turning violently against its own master. His hand twitched on the carpet, reaching out one last time before his strength completely vanished. With a final, pained gasp, the mighty and feared emperor completely lost consciousness. He fell heavily to the floor, lying still and silent in the middle of the room. Angelica stared at his prone form, part of her still waiting for him to leap back up and attack. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own ragged, panicked breathing. For a moment, a dark and ominous shadow seemed to swirl over him like a lingering curse. Suddenly, the door burst open and a stern woman in a high-collared black dress stepped inside. Angelica jumped, her heart leaping into her throat at the unexpected and sharp intrusion. The woman stopped dead in her tracks, her gaze falling immediately on the emperor on the floor. Angelica looked from the newcomer to Ranielo, her mind racing to find any plausible explanation. Countess Myron Lark narrowed her sharp eyes, analyzing the chaotic scene with cold efficiency. Angelica stood frozen in place, feeling like a criminal caught red-handed at a crime scene. "Madam," the Countess said calmly, as if an unconscious emperor were just a minor inconvenience. She walked toward Angelica, her severe expression remaining completely professional and unreadable. The Countess leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that barely reached Angelica's ears. "I shall quickly deliver the message before I leave," she said, her eyes fixed intently on Angelica. Angelica's panic flared again. What kind of message could be so urgent at a time like this? The Countess kept her back to the door, guarding their secret and ensuring they weren't overheard. On the floor, Ranielo's eyes remained shut, his breathing shallow and slightly uneven. But as the Countess spoke, one of his crimson eyes snapped open, suddenly full of awareness. He jolted upright with terrifying, unnatural speed, catching the Countess completely off guard. Ranielo clutched his head as the agonizing tremors of the divine punishment slowly began to recede, leaving him drained. News of the Emperor's sudden collapse reached Count Felon, leaving the noble stunned and paralyzed with an immediate sense of dread. Angelica stood before the Count, her expression steeled by the grim reality of her survival in this dangerous imperial court. Back in her own chambers, she looked down, her heart still racing from the terrifying encounter with her husband. From the shadows of the hallway, Countess Myron Lark peered through a crack in the door, her gaze sharp and full of suspicion. Angelica stood silhouetted against the bright light of the window, a lone figure caught in a complex web of intrigue. Ranielo remained on the floor of the bedroom, his regal composure momentarily shattered by the sudden onset of his condition. Angelica turned her back on him, unable to find any comfort in the sight of the Emperor's moment of physical weakness. With a pained groan, the Emperor began to wobble back to his feet, his iron will forcing his body to obey him. Angelica's eyes widened, a flicker of green reflecting the pure terror she felt as she watched him rapidly recover his strength. His eyes flared with a malevolent, glowing red, a sign that the beast within was fully awake and dangerous once more. A violent shiver racked her body as she realized her brief moment of reprieve had come to a chilling end. She clasped her hands together, her knuckles white as she fought to maintain a mask of calm composure under his gaze. As Ranielo reached out toward her, Angelica knew she had to escape before he could trap her in his grasp again. She dashed out of the room with frantic speed, her feet silent on the polished floor as she fled from his presence. Ranielo was left standing alone in the vast, echoing room, his gaze fixed on the doorway where she had just vanished. He stared at the broken shards of glass on the carpet, each piece reflecting a distorted, fragmented image of his own face. He realized with a hollow pang that everything between them was broken from the very beginning, beyond any hope of repair. As night fell over the palace, a desperate and angry command for strong liquor echoed through the private chambers. Count Felon shoved a maid aside in his drunken panic, his face contorted with the mounting stress of his hidden treason. He slumped onto his sofa and covered his eyes, the weight of his secrets becoming an unbearable and suffocating burden. A vision of the Emperor's obsessive and dark grip on the Empress haunted his thoughts, a grim reminder of the power he defied. He let out a heavy, weary sigh, his body sagging under the immense pressure of the plot he had foolishly set in motion. As a maid tried to attend to him, the Count could only sink deeper into the cushions, lost in his own growing nightmare.